And I usually don't say anything at the start of these compilations, but hear me out for the next 15 seconds. Most of you aren't getting my notifications anymore. Can you please check if you're still subbed? YouTube has been turning it off for a bunch of people, so you might want to check that. Alright then, back to the spooks. Have a good night.
Mum and I had a really long day of running errands, and we were heading home for the evening. We discussed stopping at our local convenience store for gas and drink, but the closer we got to the convenience store, we both agreed that maybe it was just best we go home and crash. So we did that. I even remember my mum saying exactly, "We can just get the gas in the morning." Well, little did either of us know that was probably the best decision we ever made. The next morning we got up and sat in the living room to watch TV. The news opens with a story of how 3 teens robbed, shot and killed a convenience store clerk and severely wounding a customer. The convenience store? The very same one Mum and I had been planning to stop at on our way home, 5 to 10 minutes before the robbery and shooting happened. Mum and I were shaken beyond belief. I've absolutely no doubt that had we stopped there, neither of us would have lived to tell the tale. I lost my mum in January of 2019, but I'm grateful every day that it wasn't 21 years earlier. This happened in the Philippines in 2012. I was 18 at the time, and living in a residential district by my university, where most of the structures are apartments and dormitories for rent. I was living in an apartment with my sister. Unlike my sister, I usually didn't go home on the weekends because I would rather drink with my friends. One night, while I was on my way to a party, a guy messaged me on Grindr. He had no profile picture, and seeing that he is less than a mile away, I figured that perhaps he might go to the same university that I did, and being discreet about it. I don't remember the entire conversation, but it pretty much went like this. "What's up, sexy? I'm heading out to a party. You? Really? Same. Where?" I was aware of stranger danger back then, but I felt invincible because of my height and lean athletic body. I didn't get scared easily. I sent him the name of the club. The Grindr guy replies, "What a coincidence. I'll see you there." "Sure. Mind sending me a pic?" "I'll find you," the Grindr guy replies. I didn't reply, and actually didn't care because my plan was to just enjoy the night and see where it goes. So I headed out around 10 p.m, still considered a safe hour in the city where I was staying, and walked a few blocks to the main street, and then waited for my female friend who lived in the district on the other side of the main street to pick me up. We headed to the party and met up with my other friends there. We took our seats in a booth with couches and ordered 4 drinks. Our orders came, and for a while everything seemed normal, and I honestly had forgotten about the guy on Grindr completely. The waiter then headed in our direction, bringing a glass of martinis and handing it to me. He said in our language, "It's from the guy over there," and I looked in the direction he was pointing, trying to adjust my vision to see through the laser lights and smoke. I saw this Nordic-looking, scruffy, muscular guy in a hooded sweater who raised his glass as our eyes met, smiling before he took a sip. My friend started teasing me and kept telling me to go talk to him, but I didn't want to at first. After this, most of my friends were leaving their seats to dance. I couldn't do anything because I was thinking about the guy. It took me about 30 minutes to muster the courage to finally approach him. I could remember the next events that happened vividly, not only because it was awkward, but I have never felt so threatened in my life. I sat next to him at the bar, and it seemed like he just paid for his drinks and was about to leave. Being a natural flirt, I knew I had to stop him and score one for the night, like get his number and get to know more about him. "Hey," I said. I realized that he may be a foreigner, which is typical because there are a lot of them in the city. "Thanks for the drink," I said out loud, trying to get my words in through the music. He just nodded. "Are you the guy from Grindr?" He smiled. It was weird because it almost felt like he was trying to be seductive, but at the same time hard to get, and at the same time it looked like he didn't have a clue. At that point, I was already giving up trying to start a conversation. I didn't know what was the point of giving me a drink if he didn't want to talk to me. Maybe he didn't like me when he saw me up close? With that thought in my head, I decided it was time for me to go. "Well, see you round," I said. But before I could turn around, he grabbed my shoulder gently. "Come with me," he said. It sounded like an order at first, with a hint of aggression. I thought it was just because of the accent, but it made me nervous. No stranger had ever told me to come with them in the way he did. "Sorry, I'm with my friends, but maybe we can hang out another time." "Let's go," he insisted. I wasn't freaking out at first because we were in a public place, until he stood up from the stool. I may have flinched a little when he put his arm around me, because although I was taller, he looked like he could crush me. "Sorry, I really can't. If this were another time, but I can't leave my friends." I could hear him grumbling under his breath, but as one of my friends approached us, he let go and walked out of the bar. I felt relieved but at the same time disappointed, because the guy was my type, until he started ordering me to go with him. My friends kept asking me about him, but I said I didn't seem interested, not wanting to ruin the night for them. I was a little worried because I was thinking that maybe he'd spiked my drink, but then I realized that if it was drugged, the effects would have taken me by now. We left the bar at around 2:30. I hopped in my friend's car and we parted ways with my other friends. Usually the streets would still be busy at this hour, but since it was a weekend it was empty with only a few cars passing by. As we approached a bridge, my friend looked over and was like, "You okay?" "That car's been following us," she said. I looked back and saw a black Toyota Vios. I told her not to worry about it. Perhaps they were taking the same road on their way home. "Well, whoever they are, they've been tailing us from the club," she says. I looked back once again, trying to see how many people were inside. That's when I saw it was the same guy from the club. I was immediately worried about my friend. Still thinking rationally, I told her he lived a few miles from me based on Grindr, so maybe it was his way home as well. But when I told her about what happened at the club, she began to panic. I told my friend to stop by at a coffee shop on the way, and thank God there was one open for 24 hours. She didn't want to stop because she was really scared, and if we called the cops they would probably not do something until something actually happened. We were about to park, but the car with the Nordic-looking Grindr dude just sped by. We decided that it was safer this way, and that we had the wrong assumption. So we headed directly to her house. On our way, the black Vios was nowhere in sight. I told her I would be fine walking on my own to my apartment, although she insisted that she would wake up my brother to drop me off to mine. I told her that it wouldn't be necessary, and not to bother her brother because I can protect myself. She knows me, so she gave up and told me to be safe, as I headed out. I have never felt threatened walking at this hour, because I would usually come home from parties walking in the main street to my apartment, and since there was a police station a few blocks away, I really didn't mind. As I made it across the main street from the district to where my friends live, I saw the same damn black Vios. It was a pretty common car around here, so I tried to calm myself, telling myself it wasn't him, and I started speed walking. And although my mind kept telling me to look back, I couldn't do it. I continued speed walking, and that's when I heard a car starting, which made me look back. It was the black Vios, and it started to move. There were three things going on in my mind: run to the apartment, the closest option as of now, but then to be efficient, when putting the damn key into the keyhole to unlock the door and reveal where you live, or I could run to the coffee shop. Hopefully there's a security guard there that would help me, or run to the police station. My heart felt like jelly and I didn't know what to do. The best option would probably be the coffee shop, so I began to run. I wanted to scream while I was running, but it felt like I was out of breath. The black Vios was now ahead of me, and it parked a few yards in front. This made me stop, not turn around, stop, completely on my tracks. Fight or flight, and I chose fight. I had nothing on me that I could really use, and the last fistfight I had ever been in was in 5th grade, but hell, I felt like I was ready for this. The guy stepped out the car, and it looked like he was holding a small knife. I stood my ground, although I knew I was doomed and would probably be murdered. As the guy approached, the security guard from my university called my name. I turned around, and there he was, screeching to a halt on his bicycle. He knew me because there was one time when I got to know him over a coffee. He lived nearby, and I was reminded that he would usually stroll around at this hour. "Kuya," I said, feeling relieved, sort of like an informal sir when you address someone older than you. Before I could even tell him what happened, I heard the car speeding away. The security guard and I went to the coffee shop and I bought him a coffee. He said he was called on by his fellow guard, who couldn't leave the post to scan the area because apparently they saw a strange guy lurking around the university. He even joked that maybe it was me, but I told him I'd just gotten back from the club. I also told him about the stranger and what happened, and if he saw him when he called me. He said he didn't, but he noticed the car speeding away. He also said that if I wanted to be escorted to my apartment next time I should call him, so I gave him my number. I've never heard from the guy since, and I was even planning to set him up using Grindr so we could get his identification, but I couldn't find his profile anymore when I created a new one. So, to the creepy guy who ruined my night, let's not meet.
This happened in 2008, when I was 9 years old. I lived in a townhome community, where each road had two sides of homes. In between the backs of houses, there was a back road with alleyways that went in between each building section. I lived on the edge of one of these, and my townhome was on one of the alleyways. I lived on one street, and across the back road on the opposite side lived an elderly woman whose name I can't even remember. I'm not sure what her situation was, but for whatever reason she never liked me specifically. She was creepy, and spray painted all of her windows so that no one could see in her house. However, that never stopped her from sometimes staring out of her bedroom window directly at mine, and keeping it open at night to shine a red strobe light into my room across the way. She used to yell how she hated us. I was in the 4th grade, and on a particular January morning, I had unfortunately missed the bus. My dad sent me outside to get in the car so that he could drive me, and he said he'd follow me out soon after. As I was walking to my dad's car, she came out of the alleyway next to my house, slowly, with a gigantic kitchen knife behind her back. She raised it and began running after me. I was faster than her, so I was able to avoid her, and was able to get into the house. She walked and stood on the neighbor's porch across the way and stared at my house. I was terrified. My dad ran and yelled at her, and she said she wanted to get rid of us stupid kids. My parents called the police, but the police sent her home and had an ambulance pick her up later. My parents went to some kind of court meeting about it, but I never really found out the details. But I didn't see her again after that, until 1 year later. It had snowed that morning, and I was going to run out to the front door and play in the snow. That's when I opened the door and see her standing on the porch, but looking out towards the road. I panicked, closed and locked the door. I ran up to my parents' room and told them what happened, and we saw her walk off the porch up the street, and I never saw her again after that. My family has since moved far away from there, but people I know still say she lives there, and her windows are still the same spray-painted ones. Though it doesn't affect me as much as it used to, I still don't like being around knives. I grew up in a rural area dominated by cornfields and old farmhouses. My friend Richard worked on his family dairy farm since he was a young kid, so we spent a fair amount of time following him around the farm during the summertime. His grandparents lived on the original farmhouse on the property, which was built sometime in the mid-1800s. It was a large brick house with 2 chimneys and was painted white and in fantastic shape, but definitely had an old feel about the inside of it. Richard was feeding calves one evening, so we rode our bikes to go hang out on the job. We noticed a yellow glow coming from the attic. I asked him what was up there. He looked up from the calves and squinted at the attic, saying, "I've never been up there." He pulled out his cell phone, an old Motorola Razr, and called his grandpa to tell him that he left the light on in the attic. His grandpa told him that no one had been to the attic today. Old people forget stuff all the time, so we weren't that weirded out. When Richard was done working, we went to the house and into the attic to A, turn the light off, and B, check out the attic. The door to the attic was small, maybe 3 feet, and had a deadbolt keeping it closed tight. When we walked through the door and up the narrow steps, we found ourselves in a huge space. The attic had nice wooden floors, 4 large windows, 1 on each side of the house, and was dimly lit by 3 exposed light bulbs hanging equidistant across the ceiling. The lights were off, which was weird because they were on when we walked into the house, so Richard hit the switch at the top of the steps and the bulb lit up. That's when the confusion started. The lights were bright, like fluorescent white, the white that is almost blue. It definitely wasn't the same light that we saw from the barn. We looked around and saw some old gaslight fixtures that probably hadn't been touched in decades. Gas didn't even run to the house anymore. 2 of the 4 gas lamps were warm. Turns out the attic used to be a suite back in the late 1800s. The eldest son lived there, and the plan was for him to take over the farm. You can actually see the marks on the floor where the furniture used to be. It was alleged that the son took his own life in the attic, but we couldn't find proof of that anywhere. It just goes as one of those unexplainable things. This happened back when I was 17. I'd left school that summer and had 6 weeks before starting college. It was baking hot in the small rural town that I lived in, situated pretty much in the middle of England. It's an old coal mining town, and a bit of British history here. All the mines were closed down, which decimated both the economy and job opportunities of the small pit towns throughout the country. Back to my town though. If you're old enough, or at least look old enough, you spend your time in the local pubs, if you don't have anything else to do but roam the streets seeking your own amusement. Me and my friends were the latter. On the main road through town away from the other houses stood a dilapidated house known as the O'Briens, a 4-story 6-bedroom mansion compared to all the others in town. There was an old couple who lived there at some point and had passed away some years prior, as, you guessed it, called the O'Briens. They had 2 daughters who had moved abroad and had never claimed the house, so it just sat there for years building up dust and rotting away. A perfect opportunity for somewhere cool, private, and exciting for 6 teenagers to hang out. The house had a ridiculously big back garden, which was equally ridiculously overgrown. It literally took us the good part of a day to stomp down a pathway through the nettles and brush. Once through, there was a garage that we could drop down onto, which we pulled up the roof of to gain access. We spent nearly all summer in that house, hanging out, graffitiing the walls, drinking and smoking. But there was one room that eluded us. From the garage, you headed through a kitchen, which now only consisted of a broken window that had been boarded up and a damaged set of cabinets on the back wall. You then stepped into a hallway which looked right through the front door, with a bathroom and 2 other large rooms on the left-hand side. On the right were the stairs to the 2nd floor. The staircase was built against a wall and had wooden planks running vertical. Directly opposite the kitchen door, built into the back of the staircase, was a large metal door that had been painted white. The paint was now a sickly yellow dusty colour and flaky. The door was locked. It simply wouldn't budge, and looking at the hinges, it opened inward. The house was big enough that we kind of forgot about the locked door. We spent most of the days up in the 2 rooms on the 3rd floor, away from the road and outside of the eyes of any passers-by that might have caught the cops on us. That was until one of the lads decided, for no apparent reasons, to light the moth-ridden curtains on fire with a Zippo he was messing around with. The curtains, dust-covered carpet, and old crinkled wallpaper went up in seconds. We only made it out by smashing the top window
and jumping onto a dirt mound at the side of the garage. I think if adrenaline hadn't been coursing through us, it would have been a hell of a painful fall. We hid in some bushes over the road and watched the fire engines put the flames out. But before they got there, the house had been engulfed in flames, the second and third floor mostly. The second was still usable once we had the courage to re-enter the house, but the third was gone, just the outer walls and what was left of the roof. Shame, really. So we were confined to the bottom floor. The garage was too dark to see in, and only had an old table we found that you'd normally put the paste on wallpaper. We used to get in and out of it via the roof. The kitchen wasn't really much brighter, and the front room had a big window that overlooked the footpath and road outside, so that left us a small, bleak back room to chill in, which got boring very quickly. Boredom leads to curiosity, and I noticed that one of the wooden planks on the side of the stairs was loose, and that there was an open space behind it. Finally, we could see what was behind the metal door. What a mistake that was. They say curiosity killed the cat, but in this instance it questioned my whole belief. The wooden panels were surprisingly hard to pull off, even for 6 fairly athletic teenagers, so we went out scouting and brought back a few torches and a crowbar. It was still a slog, but we finally managed to remove 2.5 of the panels. Shining the light in the hole revealed another staircase that led downwards, yet it looked as though it was decades older than the rest of the house. Cobwebs engulfed every surface, and the stench of musk and damp attacked your nostrils whenever you got anywhere near the hole. After some giddy behaviour, some pushing and shoving, and a 6-man game of rock, paper, scissors, I was the one that grabbed the torch and slowly stuck my head through the hole. The room was darker than darkness itself, so dark that the beam from the torch could be seen cutting through the blackness. I shot it down the staircase first. It went down deep. The hole we made was maybe 4 or 5 steps from the door, and there were at least 25 below it. At the bottom, a wall and a doorway to the left. I swung the torch to the right, towards the metal door, not expecting to see what I saw. The door was definitely locked tight, with 3 separate deadlocks that ran down the side, all barred. But what caught me by surprise was on the small lip of the top step, pushed firmly against the door, was a really outdated fridge. The ones that were squared and about waist height. I told the lads as they stood behind me and they laughed, thinking I was joking. One by one they stuck their head in the hole, checking out the bottom of the stairs and the fridge. Each one as confused as myself. I remember sitting down smoking a cigarette and debating how and why it would be there. The door clearly opened inwards, which meant the door must have been locked from the inside, then somehow the fridge put against it from the inside. We spent the rest of the day checking the garage and surrounding area of the house for a trap door or another entrance/exit to the cellar, but couldn't find anything. We put it down to the sheer size of the state of the garden and went home. The next few visits to the house was us trying to decide who would enter the cellar first. No one wanted to, and no matter how many games of rock, paper, scissors we played, it always was best out of a higher number, until one day we'd had enough, or at least I had. We sat in a circle in the other room, messing with stuff and just generally chatting except me. I sat and stared at this hole, this dark void in the wall. Finally I got up, exclaimed my intentions and took the torch from my pocket and stepped inside. Everyone else very excitedly followed behind. Immediately the first few layers of wood steps just disintegrated under my feet. They turned into a mulch of damp splinters that clung to the sole of my shoe when I lifted my foot. It was worrying, but the stairs seemed sturdy enough. Each step I took downwards, the temperature dropped rapidly, and the air seemed to be getting thicker and thicker. The inches of dust that I kicked up didn't help. I was a little scared, admittedly, but I had 5 other lads behind me, so it was impossible to turn tail now. I headed down and reached the last step. I could see the doorway, which led to an open room. Pausing, I regained my courage and with a few shaky deep breaths, stepped through. The room was in worse state than the stairs. Webs littered the rafters and floorboards above like moss. They hung from the ceiling in clumps, all tarnished with dust. Weirdly thinking about it now, we never saw any spiders though. The floor was carpeted in layers of debris, from rotted wood from above, dirt and dust. It was a miracle none of us ever fell through the floor above. This place was a mess. The room was huge, expanding underneath the bathroom and both rooms on the first floor, and it was dark. There was no light source other than the torches 3 of us now carried. The room stood empty, except for a wooden table smack bang in the middle. No chairs, nothing around it, but on it stood a metal plate, crudely bashed into shape with the remnants of black goo on it. Next to the plate stood a tall, uncorked green bottle. One of the boys went over to pick it up. It sloshed, as he did so, with a liquid of deep brown and layers of dirt inside. I never smelled it, but apparently it was putrid. At first we didn't see the other doorway. It was in the corner, directly opposite the one we had entered. No door, just total darkness. We tried to shine our torches through it, but they didn't seem to cut through the shadows. It was like there was actually a door there, one that drained the torchlight. For some reason I didn't muster the courage to go into that room, and neither did anyone else. We simply turned and left, feeling like we'd had enough adventure for the day. Over the next week or so we invited girls and other friends to the house, but they all refused to enter the basement. We found this hilarious, and would dare one another more to show off than anything to go down there, either on our own or in pairs, without a flashlight, and see how long we would stay down. Now, not once did I get scared while I stood in the complete darkness down there. It was kind of calming, but none of us ever had the courage to enter the other room. In hindsight, we should have questioned more why the door was metal or why it was locked from the inside, and how a fridge got up the stairs and placed in front of the door as a barrier from the inside also. But full of excitement and immaturity, it never crossed our minds. We just assumed there would be some sort of other exit in the other room that led to the garden. Word quickly went through the year groups about the O'Brien basement, and we definitely fed the rumors of it being haunted. Teenagers would ask us how to get into the house, and to show us the barricaded door and basement. So, because we thought we were cool, we spent another day making a maze in the garden, squashing pathways down that led away from the garage. We would then invite people into the house, lead them through the garden into the garage, and show them the hole in the stairs. It got quite popular, and we decided to cash in on the opportunity. We told people that if they wanted to see the basement, they would have to do the initiation. As they came in, we would have one person sat on the fridge and another at the bottom of the stairs, both with torches to send people into the first room, telling them that they had to stay in there for 10 minutes with the torches turned off, and we would then let them out. This went on for a while, and it was fun at first. A lot of people bottled it as soon as the torches were turned off, but some stayed. We cheered them back up the stairs when they completed it. It was a cheesy little ritual we created, but still, everyone refused to go into the other room. When questioned, they just said they didn't feel comfortable, until my little brother came with his friends. They were 2 years younger than us, and initially we refused to let anyone who wasn't our age into the house. We were there all the time, and there were 6 of us in the friend group, so it was pretty easy to deter people if they were managing to find the entrance at the garage. But after constant pestering and the initial curiosity of others, we decided to invite them along. We made a big deal out of it, taking them to the dilapidated fence at the back of the garden and tying their jumpers around their faces as we led them blind through the maze of shrubbery and thorns to the garage. It was a decent drop from the hole in the roof, and even though my brothers managed it, his friend had to be lowered down by his arms. Once inside, they were met with the stench of smoke that lingered from the floors above. We walked them through the kitchen, showed them the makeshift entrance to the basement, and told them the story of the metal door, and how it didn't make sense, and gave them the option of staying in the first room in the pitch darkness for 10 minutes, or go to the second room in the pitch black for 5, an offer a lot of people initially picked until they made it down. "Second room," they said in unison. We all laughed, expecting them to change their minds immediately. One of the lads slipped through the hole in the wooden board and turned right, heading up the stairs and positioning himself on the fridge. I went through next and positioned myself at the foot of the stairs. I'd just like to say at this point, all of us regulars felt completely comfortable going down to the bottom of the stairs alone. We'd all taken it in turns when bringing people down there, and had done it numerous times each. This time was no different. There was a giddy, nervous atmosphere when 2 of the younger ones entered the staircase. The torches we used were cheap ones we'd gotten from the market, so they cast an eerie yellow glow. Slowly, my brother and his friend made it down the stairs, clearly attempting to show face and act unmoved by the state of the rotten, decaying wood around them. But as they trenched through the mulch, they stuck close together. They took their time, so much so the guy at the top shouted for them to hurry, and both nearly crapped their pants. When they finally got to me, I told them this was the first room, shining the torch around the room through the doorway, and that they were to go into the next one, aiming my beam through the darkness to the frame of the other door. The room was a decent size, and as stated, the torches were cheap, but I remember taking notice that the beam that cut through the first room never seemed to illuminate the second room at all, as if there was an object obstructing the path. My brother's friend walked into the room, and as my brother walked past me, I grabbed his shoulder and told him that he didn't have to do this, and if he did, he could come back out whenever. With a nod, as a dismissive wave, he followed his friend. They crossed the room past the table and disappeared through the second doorway, as if walking through a dark stage curtain. I hit the button on my Casio watch and started the countdown from 5 minutes. I then aimed the beam of light up the staircase. The guy sitting on the fridge smiled excitedly and looked at his watch. "I really need a piss, dude. I'll be right back," he said, jumping down and disappearing through the gap. I stood at the bottom of those steps for what seemed like forever. I could hear the faint giggles from across the first room. They seemed muffled, as if hearing voices from behind the door. "How long left?" my brother's voice shouted. 3.5 minutes. Now, in the basement, despite it obviously being underground, there was never an uncomfortable temperature. It was colder than upstairs, but had no bite. There was never a chill, and while being down there countless times, not once had any of us ever felt any sort of breeze. And this memory still haunts me a little, especially when there is a sudden shift in temperature. I noticed that I became very cold and stood at the bottom of the stairs to the point where I could see my breath when checking the time against the light on my watch face. The mumble from the other room had stopped also. I tried to focus on them, see if I could hear any movement or the nervous noise they had been making before, but nothing. I remember getting freaked out. I don't know what about, but I could feel my heart beating faster. The hairs on my arms and on the back of my neck stood on end. I turned on the torch and stepped into the first room. "You guys alright?" I called out, but there was no reply. "Stop messing around." I shone the torch through the doorway of the second room, but just like before, it was as if the beam cut through the first room and stopped at the doorway. I crept closer, calling my brother's name, but he never replied. Then, as clear as day, so loud it hurt my ears after the silence, a voice, deep, brash and distorted, shouted out, "Leave now." I froze on the spot, eyes fixated on the doorway. Then emerging from the gloom ran my brother and his friend, both as white as snow, both with tears and snot streaming down their faces. The look of pure terror on their faces is something I have never been able to bleach from my mind. They bolted straight past me, which snapped me out of my trance, and I followed suit. Before we could reach the doorway to the stairs, the sound of crashing came from the stairwell. 4 ridiculously loud bangs and the noise of snapping wood. The fridge was embedded in the wall at the bottom of the staircase. Without stopping, we scrambled over it. The staircase itself was a complete mess, large splinters of wood stuck up like spikes. Luckily, and I don't know how, we managed to clamber up on our hands and feet without injury. Halfway up, I looked towards the hole in the wall, praying it would be in reaching distance, and both the young lads were in front of me, both sobbing and screaming. Both ran straight past the hole in the wall. The metal door, locked before and with no key, we looked everywhere for it, stood open. Light from the garage exit spilled through the kitchen and down into the basement, as if it showed us the quickest way out. Instinct had set in at this point, and all 3 of us darted through the door, onto the table, and up through the garage. My brother's friend, too small to get down on his own, managed to get out without help. We ran through the garden maze. At some point I had to grab hold of my brother to stop him from going down one of the many dead ends we had created, and without word took the lead. We raced to the fence, squeezed through the hole, and collapsed on the field behind the property. I looked around, and there, also sat on the grass, staring at the 3 of us, was everyone else who had been in the house. No one said a word. Everyone looked as scared as each other, except for the 2 younger boys. They wept for a long time actually, as we all just sat there in silence and let them do it. Once they had stopped, we all got up without a word and went home. My brother said nothing to me on the way, or when we got back. He went into his room, and I went into mine, and that was the end of that. No one went into the house again. It stood for a year or 2 and was then demolished. Apparently one of the daughters had finally come over to claim the land, only to sell it for some new build project. Now a group of houses sit where the garden and house were. Nice looking houses, to be fair. My brother still refuses to walk past that estate. They never built on the land directly above the cellar. Apparently, and I've never actually had this confirmed, but the builders refused to fill the cellar in for some reason, just bricked it up and left it as an open space despite being able to fit a perfectly good house on there. We only brought it up once with the friend group, and only because I convinced myself that it had been them that had opened the door somehow and moved the fridge, but they all swore that it wasn't. They said as soon as it started getting really cold in the house they got spooked. They heard the voice and headed for the kitchen, noticed the door was open, and they heard the loud bangs and bolted. I tried asking my brother about the room, but he completely shut down when I did. He quickly stopped being friends with the kid who went down with him, said they no longer had anything relevant to talk about. I'm left with a deep sense of curiosity as to what the hell was down there, what it wanted, and why it was locked in. Questions I'll never have the answers to, and perhaps it's better this way.
This is a true and real experience that happened when I was delivering newspapers early one winter morning. It was around 4 a.m. and freezing. I was out on my usual paper route delivering newspapers. The whole neighborhood was still shrouded in complete darkness. The bitter winter winds were blowing strong. I was approaching an apartment block with my papers, and as I was heading to a dark corner of the building I heard a voice. It sounded like people were talking. What the hell were people doing at this odd hour out in the cold? I wondered as I squinted my eyes in order to get a better look. As I drew closer, I saw there was a woman doubled over and crouching in the hallway before me. Instantly I knew something was wrong. As I got closer, I noticed that all the woman was wearing was her underwear. Why? Why was she out here in the freezing midwinter morning alone with no clothes on? She was shivering. I went over to her and asked her what had happened, if she was okay, and if she needed any help, but she wouldn't reply to me. I couldn't stand to see her like that. Before long she would freeze. Her lips were already going blue. I took off my coat and tried to put it around the woman, and she pleaded with me not to give her the coat and tried to push it off. She muttered something about if her husband saw her with the coat she'd be in trouble. At that moment I knew I had to do something. I suspected domestic violence, so I called the police.
and while I waited for the cops to arrive, I waited by the woman by her front door. She still wouldn't say a word. I don't know how long she'd been out there. It was truly sad and a haunting sight to see that woman alone, in her underwear, on a dark, cold winter morning. While we were waiting for the police, her front door burst open, her husband rushing out. He started shouting at her. She cowered as he threw a punch at her. I obviously intervened, and thankfully I was strong enough to protect the woman until police arrived. The woman broke down and told police that this wasn't the first time he had forced her out into the cold in just her underwear. So it seemed like this kind of thing was happening all the time, which made me sick to my stomach. I've always tried to see the best in people, but this incident rocked my confidence in human beings. I mean, to throw your half-naked wife out into the cold. Humans are terrifying. The story I'm about to share with you happened more than 16 years ago now. I used to work in this place. It was a small office/school supply store. We used to have regular clients, especially this guy in particular. He was very mysterious, was in his mid-60s and had already retired, but used to go there and just buy anything, like he had nothing better to do. He was around 5'11", good-looking for his age and very polite. He used to come with his wife and daughter, and I was kinda surprised that he even had a family to begin with, because he pinged my gaydar and no mistake. Anyway, one afternoon he came to the store and I was alone, and he asked me if he could borrow the business phone. I didn't hesitate since I knew him, and he was always very friendly. I remember that someone answered and he asked if he could talk to them. I don't remember the name, but all that I know is that the person he was trying to reach was a man, and a young person due to his name. He started talking to him and asking when they were going to see each other. After he hung up, he came to me with a smile and asked me if I was happy. At the time, I was struggling with some personal issues, but responded that I was, and he tells me that you have to follow your heart and don't worry what other people might say about you. I didn't pay too much attention to it at the time, so just kind of forgot about it. A few days went by, and my boss came to the store with a newspaper and told me something disturbing.
Hey, do you remember the guy that always comes here? He's found dead in a motel.
It was one of those that you paid per hour. Turns out he was stabbed numerous times. I was in shock. Then I remembered my gaydar feelings towards him, and him talking on the phone with that guy. He was probably talking with the one who killed him. The police never found the person who did it, and his family never followed up trying to find the murderer. I assume, but cannot confirm, that they were ashamed about his double life. This happened to me when I was in 3rd grade. My regular babysitter was ill, so my mum asked one of our neighbors, Brandy, who had kids and babysat a lot of the neighbors' kids, if she could watch my brother and I for a few hours. We were having so much fun at Brandy's house. When my mum came to pick us up, I asked if we could stay a little longer and finish Madagascar, as we'd just started. She said it was fine, but I was to walk straight home after, like maybe half a block. A block, so not far at all. As the movie finishes, Brandy said I need to get home fast because it was dark out. As I was walking home, this other neighbor, Dennis, is standing outside in his yard. I had seen Dennis about the neighborhood because his wife was very unforgettable looking. They had a daughter and she was about 4-ish, and I didn't ever play with her or know her family outside of seeing them around the neighborhood. Dennis starts calling to me. "Hey, what are you doing?" "I'm going home to my parents." "Do you want to come inside for a bit?" "No, I told my mum I'd come straight home." "I'm sure she won't mind." "No thanks. I have a daughter who would love to play with you. We can make snacks." At this point I was like, red flag, abort mission, and I start booking it home. Then he starts to follow me, not quickly, just walking like Michael Myers. Luckily I made it home, and once he saw that I was approaching my house with my porch light lit, he backed off. I'd like to mention that behind our house was a giant wooded area with paths that led to the nearby lake. So this dude could have caught me and dragged me into the woods or something. I try not to think about what could have happened and what motives he had. Well, fast forward until I'm in high school working at a restaurant in town, and I see creepy Dennis and his wife all the time. Turns out they were secret shoppers in our restaurant, and I don't think he recognized me working. Thankfully. My father had many jobs in his life. He's been a veterinarian, a meat processor, which is a cross between a butcher and a slaughterhouse owner, a farmer, a power plant executive, and a preacher. When he was running his meat processing plant, he used to do home deliveries for some of his customers. One day, when I was around 7 or 8, he did a home delivery on his way home from the plant. He came in and got cleaned up. As we sat down for dinner, he started talking about the weird delivery he'd just made. The house he went to was owned by a young couple with a son about 5 years older than I was. When Dad came by with the delivery, they invited him in. My dad's a really friendly guy, never meets a stranger, and never turns down an invitation to come in and chat and share a beer. He's talking with the couple about their son. He remarks that the boy was really strange, but he chalked it up to the kid likely going through puberty. But he noticed that he really thought it was weird that the parents never left the boy alone, anywhere into the house. If he went into his room, the mum got up and went with him, or his dad would stand just outside the door. The other thing he noted is that every door had a deadbolt on it, the deadbolt that needed a key to operate. Every door, closets, bathrooms, bedrooms, every door. Dad thought it was strange. Strange enough that he brought it up with a friend who worked at DCFS, but nothing was ever done about it. They just said they'd keep an eye on it. He also knew the boy's doctor, and he said something to him about it. The doc said he'd keep an eye on it too, but again, there was never anything done that I know of. So, 10 years pass, and the boy is a senior in high school. By all accounts, he's a normal, quiet teen. Then, one morning, we turn on the news to see this normal, quiet teen had taken a .22 and put a round into the back of both of his parents' skulls. Finally, when the kid was asked why he did it, he said he flunked a class and was afraid his parents wouldn't let him go camping with his friends that weekend. His attorneys had evaluated. There were questions about how the house was arranged, but there was zero evidence of abuse. The really creepy thing is, there seemed to be no sign of struggle by the parents. Mum and Dad were sitting right next to each other. He said he shot one, then the other, but there was no running away, no ducking or hiding, just bang, bang, and both were slumped over on the couch. My dad often wonders if the parents knew their child was a disturbed person, and the locks and behavior around him were designed not for abuse or anything sinister, but to rather protect themselves from him. For context, I am a 28-year-old single woman. I do pretty well in my field, and had just gotten out of a bad relationship that I don't want to get into. I had enough money saved up so that I could redo my attic. I wanted it as a new bedroom. It would be far more spacious than the downstairs room I had. I had hired a bunch of guys to do it as part of a company, and they would come in all day and be fixing it. I worked from home, which is good because I liked supervising to make sure that everything was going up to speed. They had a big plastic sheet covering the portion of the house that they had to basically destroy in order to get the work done. It wasn't a problem. My bedroom was on the lower part of the house, so I didn't really go up there anyway. The story begins about 5 days into their work. They had been diligently doing whatever it is they were doing and left for the day. I was alone, watching TV on my computer. Now, something important that I need to add is that I had been flirting with a guy over Tinder. We had been talking for a while now, and he seemed quite interested in meeting up. But something about him gave me a bad vibe, and I wasn't sure if I was being judgmental or not, as he did look really attractive. I kind of put him on the side as I was focusing on the house ordeal, and hadn't spoken to him in the last few days. When I get a message from him, asking how I've been and what I've been up to. It had just started to rain. I paused what I was watching on my laptop and contemplated replying to the message. After staring at my phone for a few seconds, I realized I really couldn't be bothered at this very moment, so I put the phone back down, ignored the notification, and carried on with my show. As the evening progressed, the night was getting stronger, and the sound of rainfall has this curious effect, even when in the background with me, when it just makes me fall asleep. I started realizing that I'd missed half of my show, so decided to put it on pause, got up, closed my laptop, and made my way to the bathroom to get ready for bed. That's when I heard a curious noise from the attic, even though the heavy rain was muffling lots of sound. It sounded like movement. This was definitely curious. I hadn't heard anything from the attic before, not while there was no one in the house anyway. I just stayed silent, listening. There it was again, another kind of shuffle, sort of scraping sound, sort of like the sound you'd make if you moved your shoe across wood. I stood there in complete silence, listening at the rain, contemplating my next move. Could it be an animal that got in? Surely it's not a person. I saw all the men leave. I started to feel a bit weirded out. I got a shiver down my spine while thinking about what to do. If it was a home intruder, then they could certainly hear down any noise I made down here. If I were to call someone, or the cops, they'd hear. What if they heard me and attacked before anyone could make it? 1,000 thoughts flashed through my mind. I decided the best thing to do would be to try and silently make my way to my car outside. Yeah, that made sense. It's a real shame the floor of my house is so super creaky. I started making my way out, grabbing my keys from the hook, silently as possible, in front of the house. I gave a glance upstairs towards the attic, but couldn't really see much because of the plastic in the way and the debris that the builders had left all over the floor. I silently closed my door, ran in the rain to my car, and while I was under the protection of my vehicle, called the police. I sat there talking to the dispatch, explaining the situation, and they told me they would send a squad car over. Within minutes, someone was there, and the police officer asked me to roll down my window, which I did. The three of us were getting soaked. I told them to please go inside and just check out the house and that I was frightened. The officers opened the door and in they went. 5 minutes later, one of them comes out and says it's safe to come in again. When I do come in, they tell me that they had found someone upstairs in my attic. I am horrified by this information and get a really strange sensation in the pit of my stomach, a confirmation of dread and deep-seated fear. I ask them who it is, and they bring forward a person, and when I see them my eyes bulge. It was my Tinder match. How the hell they figured out where I lived and managed to sneak into my house is beyond me. He started to babble something about not replying to him, but before he even had another chance to speak, they dragged him into the squad car. I was asked if I wanted to report anything else, and I said thank you, and before long they had left, leaving me with this horrifying ordeal in the pit of my stomach and processing what had just happened. Needless to say, since these events I have several trust issues when it comes to meeting new people, especially with dating. You just never know who's a creeper out there or what some people are capable of. About a decade back, I used to work at a brewery/pub. It was a pretty big and old building from the early 1900s. I worked there for a few years, and most of the time it was pretty chill, but at times backbreaking. On my time working there, I had two experiences that I can only describe as supernatural. The first one was a particular night and I was tasked with closing up the hangar/loading docks. Closing it up was making sure there weren't any obstructions where the trucks would park, stacking up loose crates, and turning the lights off and locking up. I was about done, so I turn off the lights as I'm making my way to the door, and a beer bottle comes rolling towards me from the darkness between the tall stacks of crates. It wasn't forceful or anything. It looked like someone gently placed it on the floor and rolled it towards me. I didn't think much of it, so I picked up the bottle and placed it inside a half-empty crate. I turned around, and I started walking when another bottle comes rolling from the same place, then another. Tired and thinking it was a co-worker trying to mess with me, I shout, "Hey, alright, you got me. Come on, I gotta close up." I expected to hear laughter or something, but there was just dead silence. I waited a few minutes, turned on my flashlight, and started looking around the stacks of crates for what I thought would be a giggling co-worker. After searching each corner, I turn and give up. I was a little weirded out at this point, but I just picked up the 2 bottles from the ground, placed them in the same crate as the first one, turned off my flashlight, and shouted into the darkness, "Alright, I'm locking up. See you tomorrow." Just as I finished saying that, a crate full of bottles fell from one of the stacks and landed 2 feet from me. Glass shards and beer exploded everywhere. The next day I told my boss about it, and he said it was probably a rat. The thing is, those crates, when full, probably weighed 20 pounds. How could a rat push it? Talking to my co-workers, they told me they've experienced weird stuff during closing. My second experience happened again when I was closing the pub. When closing, the last thing you usually do is restock the walk-in freezer. The freezer is probably just as cold as the building itself and sits underground right beneath the bar. I was down there, filling that enormous thing with kegs and crates. Being a very old freezer from the time when safety wasn't a big concern, the thing doesn't open from the inside. No handle, nothing. Just a flat, plain steel door. So I did what I always do when I have to go inside that thing. I put a keg securing the door open. I was halfway through the task when I hear the door slam shut. I run towards the door, but it's locked shut. I started pounding on it, but the only other person there was my boss in the office 2 floors above me, probably with his door closed. I tried my phone, but since I'm locked underground inside a steel box, I had no cell phone service. I was wearing only jeans and a t-shirt, so things were getting chilly pretty quickly. My face was going numb, and my hands were getting stiff. I made a blanket out of cardboard, but it was doing very little from keeping the cold at bay. The only reason I didn't freeze to death was because I had a date with a regular, and she went there looking for me. She asked my boss where I was, and when he couldn't find me, he went to the basement and found me inside the freezer. I was there for 45 minutes when he found me, and I was starting to consider writing a letter to my parents and drinking myself to sleep. My boss installed a chain to keep the door after that, but I refused to ever go back into the walk-in freezer after that. The weirdest part, the keg I had holding the door open was on the other side of the room when I got out. It was a full steel keg, not something that just slides away quietly. I stopped working there shortly after for unrelated reasons. When my brother and I were younger, our parents took us on an unforgettable trip to a theme park. The theme park has since closed down, and I think incidents like the one I'm about to describe are most likely responsible for its shutdown. I was around 8 or 9, and my brother was around 4 or 5 when this happened. It was summer vacation, and our parents promised us that if we were good during the summer break, then before we would go back to school, they would take us to an amusement park. After many boring days and nights of good behavior, our promise was delivered. We all bundled into the car and headed for the amusement park. It wasn't Disney World or Fuji Q Highlands. It was a bit on the cheaper side and a bit more old school. I think the park was established in the 60s, so it was the kind of park that still had haunting clown murals everywhere and the creepy robotic animatronics. Those 2 titans of terror would be enough these days to put me off wanting to go, but back in the 80s, these creepy clowns and glitchy animatronics were socially acceptable. I guess we had come all the way anyway. We finally get to the park, a little later than my parents had hoped. There was the usual bickering on the car ride that had been intensified due to a flat tire and bad directions. I guess we got there around 7, and the park was set to close at 9. We would have all of the next day to go to the park, but we were so eager to see something before we went to bed. We were staying in the park hotel, so we dumped our bags in the room and then headed down to the park as a family. When we were in there, it was the usual kind of thing. Ferris wheels, roller coasters, bumper cars. Our parents pitched up a picnic table and got themselves a few drinks to let us roam the small park together. We went on this Ferris wheel, and that was great, if not a little creaky. It gave us an aerial view of the park. There was a clown show kind of area, and one of the clowns was waving to us. We waved back, of course. Then the clown started making his way over to the Ferris wheel as we descended. He greeted us as we got to the bottom. It was great, we felt so special. He had a big old red diamond painted over his eyes, a blue nose and mad yellow hair. His white clown face paint glowed, and as the sun was beginning to set, he asked, "Hi kids, are you enjoying the park?" "Yeah, we are," we replied. He made some small talk with us, and then asked us to play the honesty game, and that if we answered all the questions honestly, we would get a prize. "What's your favorite color? Are your parents here? Do you like soccer, kids? Are you staying at the park hotel? What's your favorite ride? What room number are you staying in? Do you like maths or science the least?" Since we were young, we answered all his questions honestly, and he was true to his word. He said he would come and deliver a special ticket to our hotel room later, and that the ticket would allow us to go on a special ride with him. But if we told anyone about the ticket, we wouldn't be allowed on. We could barely contain our excitement. We agreed, and he said he would go let our parents know. Looking back on that now, we missed several red flags. I mean, remembering this is quite traumatic. After an hour or so, the park put a message over the speaker system saying it would be closing shortly. Our parents rounded us up, and we had our dinner and went back to the room. We whispered to each other about our special ticket coming later, giddy with excitement. Our parents said they were heading downstairs to the hotel bar, and they put a movie on for us and told us to stay in bed and keep the door locked. We couldn't focus on the movie. We sat on our bed staring at the door waiting for the clown to come and collect us for our special ride. After about 20 minutes of our parents leaving, we heard a knock at the door. I pushed a chair up to the door to look at the people to see who it was. I saw a man out there. I was so disappointed that it wasn't the clown, I quietly climbed back down from the chair and told my brother. The man outside knocked the door again, but we ignored it. Then he spoke. "Kids, don't you want to ride the super secret ride?" It was the clown's voice, but when I looked out the peephole a few minutes ago, it was just a man. I thought something wasn't right. "Hurry, kids, you'll miss your chance!" My brother began to put his shoes on, and I grabbed his arm. This was wrong. I didn't like this. I called back, "No." It was all I had. I just instinctively knew that the door should remain shut. He wasn't the clown anymore. "Open the door," he said, dropping his clown voice. My brother began to whimper. I said nothing. "Open the door now, or you'll be in so much trouble." My brother pulled on my sleeve and ushered me towards the bathroom. I then heard the man fiddling with the lock, knocking and muttering. His voice was getting angrier. We locked ourselves in the bathroom. He hammered on the door, he was shouting, and then the room fell silent. About 10 minutes passed and we heard the door open. Silent tears were rolling down my brother's face and mine, as I held his hands over his mouth to muffle his screams. "Where are they?" I heard my mom call, and relief washed over us. We told our parents about what happened, and they thought we had just watched a scary film or had a bad dream. We couldn't convince them of the fact that we just had a near miss. Years later, the park was shut down. I hope to God nothing bad happened to anyone else, and it just went out of business. This happened to one of my friends. He came across a guy over Grindr, and they really hit it off, so they decided to meet for dinner. All was going well, and his date even mentioned how he broke up with the guy he was dating with and is now ready to move on. Well, one thing led to another, and a guy invites him over to his house. My friend, who is very apprehensive of hooking up with someone he just met, started asking this guy whether he lives alone, as my friend wasn't comfortable going to someone's place if they had a roommate. The guy assures my friend that he lives alone since his ex has moved out, and then finally, they head over to his place. They both shift to a room, and before my friend could get comfortable, the guy removed all his clothes and was ready to pounce. Suddenly there's a huge commotion outside the room, and my friend hears someone shouting and breaking things. Apparently the so-called ex was back and claiming that this guy was cheating on him. Mind you, this guy is very upset and banging on the door. I don't know how he slams the door open, and he has a pair of scissors in his hand. As soon as he sees his boyfriend naked, he jumps out on him in a fit of anger. Luckily, my friend, who was balls deep in fear, saw the opportunity to run, and he literally ran for his life. He also has no clue what happened to both of them, but his apprehension of hooking up with someone he just met has now turned to fear. Between the ages of 4 and 12, I was friends with a boy called Jack. Jack was always a bit of a strange kid, but being my neighbor, he was my first friend in life. Me and Jack used to play out every day, whether it was football, going to the park, or even tag in the street with the other kids. You name it, we did it. One weekend it was summer, and when we were 8 years of age, it was a scorching hot day, and 2 of the kids in our street were having a water fight. Having some water guns in our shed, I thought it would be a great idea to fill one up and join in. So as the day goes on and we're having a great time, and a few other kids had joined in with their water guns, this is when Jack comes out with one of those insulated flasks that keeps your water/drinks warm all day, and he hurls his flask. Presumably he intended to throw the water, but it was full to the brim and it proved too heavy for him to keep hold of, and the water and flask fell to the pavement. Steam instantly rising just a few feet from me and the other one of the kids. Jack's mum came rushing out of her house and screaming at him to get inside. Being only 8, I didn't realize how serious this was. A few years later, Jack and me went to our local park, and when we got there, Jack asked me if I wanted to see something cool. He then pulled out a BB gun, a good one at that, and said he got it off his dad, who said he could shoot cans with it. But when me and Jack went into the forest behind the park, Jack started firing at random kids also playing in there. I told him to stop a few times, but he told me to stop being boring and continued with his stupid behavior. I then made my way home, where Jack would follow, shooting at me every so often, hitting me in the shins a few times. I told Jack to grow up and told him I didn't want to hang around with him anymore in school or after school. I continued to see Jack in school, who would smile creepily at me and would make slices across the throat with his fingers when he saw me. And one day I was in my garden with my cousin, and Jack was in his bedroom window with a tie and made a noose gesture with it and pointed at me and my cousin before smiling sinisterly. Jack became very odd, and with our houses being attached and us unfortunately having the same back bedrooms, I would hear him hysterically laughing at night and would hear bangs on the walls at stupid hours. Shortly after I turned 11, Jack and his family moved away, and life was peaceful. I continued to grow up and live out to my mid to late teens with great friends, and Jack became a distant memory as I lived out my teens and moved away to university. I'm 22 now, and when I visited home this past summer, my parents informed me that Jack had been admitted to a mental institution after he had attempted to kill his parents and had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. This shocked me as I didn't quite know what to say, but these events did come flashing back to me. My dad actually told me that the water fight incident was serious. Jack had attempted to throw boiling hot water at me and my friend that day, and we would have been seriously scolded had he succeeded. So Jack, I hope you get all the help you need in that mental institution, and hope we don't meet again.
My very first car was a dark green 2000s Volkswagen Jetta. It was the most basic of basics when it came to cars, no options whatsoever except for an automatic transmission. It was $300, slow, dumpy, no right headlight, drove straight with the steering wheel practically sideways, and let out a cloud of white smoke when it started. Every stereotype of a poor high schooler's car you can think of, and my car was no exception. Despite it being a piece of crap, I loved that car. I drove it every chance I had, and I don't think a day went by I didn't drive it. I named it Thunderbuddy. She was my baby, my beautiful green baby, but Volkswagens from that generation, Jettas especially, had a pretty bad flaw in the automatic transmission. I'm not sure exactly what caused it, but essentially the transformations gradually get worse and worse until the car will not shift into third gear, and there's not a thing you can do from there. So a couple of weeks after Halloween 2019, I was going around 30 miles an hour, when the engine suddenly roared, and the car wouldn't speed up. I feared the worst, and my fears were justified. My dad, a mechanic, didn't even have a hope for my baby. She was gone already, and so much to my dismay, I started looking for a new car. It only took about a month for us to find her, a dark green 1999 Volkswagen Jetta. Exactly like my old car, but with all the trimmings. She was faster, had heated leather seats, auto windows, auto sunroof, everything. All except automatic transmission. I knew how to drive manual, so it was perfect. I had a new baby. From the crackhead neighborhood girl to Scarlett Johansson. At least in my eyes, I loved the car even harder, named it Little Boy and was happy. Okay, now for the story. But I need a few things to explain first in order to really gather the context. Firstly, when you have a manual car, you cannot leave it in gear and take your foot off the clutch. If you do, it will stall, which is bad. So if you do leave your car in gear, you need to turn the engine off before taking your foot off the clutch. If you don't want to turn the car off, or have it turn itself off, you need to pull the handbrake on or it will roll away. Take a guess what was the only real broken thing on my car, and this is the point the story takes place. I started working as a pizza delivery driver in a smaller growing town in Michigan. It was good money, but every once in a while I delivered to an incredibly sketchy place, and I've had a few shotguns pulled on me. One night about 2 months ago, I was delivering on a Friday. Usually Fridays are very busy, but this day was a little slow. So when a delivery came at 8:30, a half an hour before we closed, I jumped on it. I realized I was 7.1 miles away, so all of the closing jobs would be done by the time I got back, and I would have been able to leave immediately. It was way out of town in a wood-surrounded neighborhood, but again, no work when I got back to the store, so it seemed like a good deal to me. And I'm all about those sorts of deals, and so I climbed into my car and went to drive the 7.1 miles. As I pulled up to the house, I began to get a bad feeling. The house was in a small trailer park type neighborhood next to a lake, the kind that the houses are all a good distance apart, likely with a drug problem, and it was completely dark. No lights on anywhere, and there was a single car in the driveway and an open window on the side of the house. I pulled in behind the car in the driveway and sat there for a moment. Something was off. By the house being completely dark, I mean there wasn't so much as a nightlight that I could see. Usually when I deliver to a dark house, there's at least a light on upstairs or something that would signal someone being awake and waiting for their pizza. But the household seemed dead. Nevertheless, I put the car in gear, turned off the engine and grabbed the small, cheapest pizza we had and got out. Without my headlights on, there was nothing. I could barely see the house. The only light was from the dim moon. I walked onto the porch and passed the big open window to the front door. As I reached the front door, I saw it. The door was slightly cracked open, and just enough for me to see into the void of the house. Thinking of every single horror movie I'd ever seen, I said aloud, "Screw this," and hurried back to my car. I'm a tall, well-built looking guy, but despite my wide shoulders and baggy hoodie, I'm frail and can hardly fight off a small dog. I got into my car and turned on the engine. My headlights illuminated the house, and almost simultaneously, the living room lights behind the big door open window lit up. A single guy looked out and walked to the front door. I cussed to myself and weighed my options. If I went to the door, I could die. If I noped out of there, I could 110% be fired. That meant no new car part, no gas money,
no cute dates with my girl. Just sitting there at home doing virtual schoolwork. It was a stupid choice, I know, but I grabbed the pizza and opened my door, making a choice I am damn glad I made. I took the car out of gear and climbed out, mostly so my engine would still be running, so that if I needed, I could run back and immediately take off. I walked to the door. There was the man. He had opened it the rest of the way. As I got closer, I got a good look at him. I'm not to judge a person based on their physical appearance, but this guy's head was clean shaven and covered in tattoos. He was wearing a pair of grey jeans and a white tank top. He had a scowl on his face and was staring at me dead in the eyes. I looked past him for a moment into the house, which was completely empty. As I got close enough that I started opening the pizza bag, he began reaching around his waist. I stopped. He was staring at me with the most evil grin I'd ever seen. I knew in that moment that I was about to die. I had always heard your life seems to flash before your eyes, and I thought about my girl, that she wouldn't know what happened. My work would stop delivering upon my disappearance, assuming that my body was never found. My dad would regret telling me he was happy for me for landing this job. God save thee. That's when I heard it, the distinct sound of gravel under tires. My only pathetically small chance of escape was rolling away, and I didn't even look back at the car to know that. Remember, the part of my car that was damaged was the handbrake. I stared at the man, and was about to say, "Screw you," when he looked back to my car. Then I heard the sound of the car rolling. It was getting closer. The guy's eyes went from the driveway to behind me. I finally looked over my shoulder. My car had rolled backwards and had come to a smooth stop near the mailbox of the house. I looked back at the guy who had a nervous look. He looked back at me and scowled again, and took his hand from around his waist. He reached into his front pocket and took out $12 and handed it to me. I gave him the pizza and watched him slam the door shut. I ran back to my car, practically tore the door open, trying to get in. I looked back at the house and the man was standing in the front window staring at me. You better believe I nearly spun those tires all the way to get out of there. I kept glancing at my mirrors until I started driving under some streetlights. It was easily the scariest moment I've ever had. As soon as I got back to my store, I told my boss about it, and she called the police. We never heard anything about it. I assumed they went to the house and only found a small cheese pizza, and I started carrying a knife on me at all times, and my boss is considering getting trackers for our pizza bags. Only recently did I realize this is a sort of butterfly effect. I thought it was the worst thing ever that my transmission went out. I cursed Volkswagen for designing such a terrible automatic transition, but if that transmission still worked, then I would have still had that car when this happened, and I would have put the car in park and it would have sat there while whatever would have happened to me happened. I've zero doubt in my mind that that man was planning on murdering me. So crappy German engineering saved my life from being murdered. This happened in my childhood home almost 20 years ago now, when I was between the ages of 6 and 12. The house was built sometime around the 1700s and was an old farmhouse. At some point it had been divided into 3 houses, and then we bought it and knocked it back into one house. Also knocking down one end, which had lost its character through the years, and built a new extension that fit the style of the house better. My bedroom was in the newly built part of the house rather than the original one. There were a few areas that I always felt uncomfortable in. The upstairs hallway at night being long and dark, one of the outhouses which had a small window into a room that we never found any other access to, but I think that was just because I was young and it was dark. But mostly, I loved the house. I even cried when we moved. As a family, we were recently reminiscing about the house and our ghost stories about the big mouth Billy Bass going off on one side of the house, when we were all watching TV. It's the only weird thing that we could recall. How A, it went off in an empty room while not being on the motion sensor setting, and B, it was so loud we could hear it from the other side of the house and with the TV on. I brought up what used to happen in my room, and my mum was completely shaken because apparently I never told her but kind of just assumed it was broken and just only happened in the middle of the night. But upon discussing it, I suppose it really doesn't make sense. The actual story is there was a door in the bedroom, a built-in wardrobe to the left, and an attic access in the ceiling in a small area, which then opened up to the rest of the room, kind of like two squares that overlapped at one corner. Sometimes in the middle of the night, the door to the attic would crash open. It was one of those ones that you pushed up and it unclicked and you could swing down and grab the ladder. So if you're not holding it after unclicking it, then it'll just swing freely down and crash into the frame. It did this most nights, effectively trapping me in the room with a massive black hole in the ceiling. It always woke me up. It seemed like the loudest sound in the world. I would hear some movement in the attic, but the house was always making strange sounds anyway. And then in the morning, I'd just close it up again and never told anyone. My mum is a very pragmatic person, but she didn't seem to believe it was just a faulty latch. I'm curious what other people think. Some of you might say it was a squatter, and the house was abandoned when we bought it, but the attic was newly built in that new section of the house, blocked off from the old attic. We replaced most of the roofing beams in the old attic because there was rot. So builders had been in there, and we also kept some things up there. There was never any evidence of squatting, even when we first got the place. The house was in a small village in the countryside, populated by 200 people. I don't think it would have been possible from the inside, and it would have been over 6 years, and you'd have to be the dumbest squatter to make that much noise every night. The ladder was independent of the door. It never came down. The door to my room needed to be open for the ladder to come down through it. I think the faulty latch would have been the most reasonable explanation. But then, why only at night? The fact it was right next to where the darn fish started singing on its own too. But there really wasn't any other activity otherwise. It just made me jolt awake in panic most nights. We moved out of there in 2004, so I can't do any further investigation, but it was scary at the time. This all started when I was around 13. It began with footsteps that were heard by my stepdad, my mum, and sister. That's when we were all sitting in the living room. It had done numerous things over the years. The spirit turned on blenders, turned on lights, turned on water faucets, lots of footsteps and moving things around. There were lots of witnesses to many of these events. It quieted down over the years. About a year ago, there was a flurry of activity over a few weeks, witnessed by my wife and my mum who was visiting. There hadn't been anything I noticed until last night. Earlier this year, I did an organization of the house. We have 2 kids of 9 and 7, and we went through all their toys and asked them if they wanted to save or donate anything. All the toys they wanted to keep, to give to their kids someday, I put in a plastic Ziploc bag and into a tote, and I put that in the top shelf of the basement. I went downstairs last night, and a set of baby keys were laying on the basement floor. What I mean by baby keys are plastic keys you give to babies for them to chew or play on. They are bright colours, about 6 to 8 of them, and I specifically remember my daughter telling me she wanted to keep them, and I put it in one of the bags. Now the bags are on the top shelf. My kids are little and physically incapable of taking down, let alone pulling the totes back up. They also will not go downstairs by themselves because they're scared of ghosts. Also note, I took Christmas decorations up from the basement a few weeks ago and put the plastic totes back. There were no keys on the floor. Also, note, my wife has not messed with any of the stuff in the basement, as she leaves it to me to take stuff up or down. So they were there, on the basement floor. When I saw them, I said out loud, "That's unusual. They're still there. I haven't put them back yet. It's not earth-shattering, but it's unusual. And I wonder how they got there, and if there's some strange phenomena behind its sudden appearance." My hobby is mountain hiking. The kind of mountains I like to hike are the ones with no roads, no other people, and where wild vegetables grow. Off the beaten track hiking. Sometimes on these hikes I come across strange or unusual things. For example, I once saw an albino antelope, and on another occasion I saw an eagle the size of a fully grown man. However, the weirdest incident was the time I came across a family impossibly far into the mountains. It was a weekday afternoon. I was hiking along the prefectural border between Miyagi and Yamagata and Akita. There was a forest of huge beech trees, which made it quite easy to walk as it got dark. This is a place that not an everyday person would hike. Only local people to this mountain range would probably know about it, or people like me who enjoy hiking and have GPS. It was secluded. As I was walking along a small ridge, I noticed a small stream flowing below. At the edge of the stream, I saw a man standing there. I first thought, he must be doing a spot of fishing. But then I noticed that he wasn't alone. 4 other people stood with him. They were all standing in the river. I couldn't see clearly because they must have been at least 100 meters away, but I was sure there were 4 people stood in the river. 2 appeared to be children. I don't know why, but I thought they may be on the verge of ending their own lives together. I mean, to come all the way out here, into this secluded mountain river alone so close to dark. If that were the case, I planned to intervene and try to talk them out of it. I hope that wasn't the case, of course, but either way, I was interested in finding out what was going on, so I used my binoculars to take a closer look. Just as I thought, there were 4 people facing away from me, 2 children and 2 adults. I watched for a moment, waiting for them to turn my way so that I could catch a glimpse of their faces, but they didn't move at all. I must have been watching them for 5 minutes and they didn't move. Then it dawned on me. They're mannequins. Someone must have put them here as a prank or a trap. I decided to go for a closer look since my first thought was to check on the family anyway. I quietly crept closer. I didn't want to be noticed. In my mind, I was planning my escape route. Jumping into the river itself crossed my mind if something terrible were to happen. As I drew closer, my predictions came true. There were 4 mannequins before me, 2 adults and 2 children, all dressed up, out here in the middle of nowhere. I was disgusted. My body shivered. I couldn't logically think why they were here. I thought to myself, someone did this. They must be absolutely not right in the head. I was now close enough to see the details on the mannequin. Each one had a name painted on its front. Every mannequin was peppered with small holes, like bullet holes, like a shotgun bullet trail. The piece de résistance was a broken box cutter blade sticking out of one of the child mannequins' backs. That was enough for me. I was terrified, and I began to make my way back down the mountain. Even as I write this now, I'm shivering. Those creepy mannequin dolls, with marks all up and down them. Someone carried them all the way there to do what and why? They're not like mannequins either. They were bulky, heavy wooden ones. If I had to carry one myself, I'd have to stop for a while to take rest, and that was just one. But there were 4 of them. It would take forever to get them there. This happened around 2 years ago, and I haven't gone back to check if they're still there. But my guess is that they probably are. I'm a gay man of 32 and living in Southern Oregon. I have a rather large following on my nature photography Instagram and Twitter. Having a large follower count, and even sometimes a modest size count, you encounter people who push the limits into ranges that are rather inappropriate. I've had my fair share of creeps who push the limit. Most of them don't faze me. It's easy to block people and ignore them as well, and usually after a short period of time they seem to piss off. Except for one guy. I received a message one morning from a guy in Colorado. He was 24 or 25, and he seemed rather nice. He messaged me with the usual, "Hey, how you doing?" Being a down-to-earth person, I always try and respond and ask the same. Though, with the amount of messages, I cannot continue conversations with everyone, or I'd never get off the phone. But I did try my best. Usually the messages are friendly-natured or oriented quite nicely, and the occasional flirt. But after this guy got a reply from me about how I was doing, he jumped right in. "You're really hot. Where do you live? I want to know about you." I responded in a friendly capacity, saying thank you and that I was from the Pacific Northwest, keeping it vague. The conversation then changed even further. "I'd like to meet you. When can I meet you? We could be boyfriends." Then it happened, like it always does. "So how big's your member? Are you a top or bottom? Do you like being dominated?" Being more interested in personality first, I read his message but didn't reply. I wasn't really interested anyway. I looked over his profile, and there were little things that he would post that made me feel like I wouldn't feel comfortable talking to him, aside from him coming on really strong. Being this was on Twitter and I didn't reply, I didn't believe they sent red receipts, and I figured he'd just get the hint. A day went by, and he messaged me a few more times with more live comments. I'll admit, my Twitter is not safe for work, so I kind of expected it, and I responded him telling him thank you for the compliments, but I didn't answer his questions about the location. Again, I kept everything short and vague, and then stopped responding altogether. After a few days, he messaged me, "Are you ignoring me?" I mean, it was kind of obvious I wasn't responding, and still posting on my social media sites frequently. I eventually responded that I didn't feel comfortable with the conversation approaching, and that I don't give out my location and such. He clearly responded, rather offended, "Okay, whatever," so I blocked him. Later that night, the day I had blocked him, I got a message from another account, just random letters with the username with no posts. The message went as follows: "Why the hell did you block me? I just wanted to get with you. You're disgusting. Unblock me or you'll regret you ever did." Screw this noise, I blocked that profile too, without responding. He then sent me messages on Instagram, and using my email from my Instagram contact button emails me too. The messages were along the lines of, "I love you, unblock me or you'll regret this, I'm going to end my life," or that he would end mine. I reported these messages to Instagram, to Twitter, blocked him, took screenshots of the messages, and didn't respond to the email with the same vulgar content. He messaged me from yet more accounts telling me that he has all of my photos from IG and Twitter, and that he was going to use them to catfish people on Grindr, and that I would regret blocking him. He sends me several Grindr profiles he's created with my pictures. I talked to a friend of mine who's an attorney, and he wrote up a legal statement to send to him, "You cannot legally use my photos to impersonate me, I will press charges, etc." And I sent them to him, on yet another profile he is harassing me on. The long legal sounding warning message that he needs to cease his actions immediately, and he responded with, "Go ahead, have fun, I'm having fun on Grindr." Then the messages got darker. He messaged me the next day, "I'll kill you, I promise you that." And another message, "I know where you live," sending me a Google Street photo of my previous address and my grandparents' house. The messages continued, "I'll hunt you down, I'll kill you. But first I'll have some fun with you for a good long time, then I'll chop you up into little pieces." I'd had enough. Being a stalker asshole is one thing, ignoring the warning cease and desist and impersonating me and threatening me is another. I called the local police department from his area, and he used his, what I assumed to be real, photos on his profiles, and I was able to find him on Facebook, although it may not have been his real name and photos, considering he had dozens of Instagrams and Facebook profiles with his name and the same photo, but with different info on each, to the tune of "I'm the former Marine" on one, "I work with the US Marshal Service" on another, etc. Upon contacting the local Colorado Police Department from his area that he located himself, being from in his messages and profiles, the lady on the line told me there's not much they can do, as the jurisdiction would be the place the crime is committed in, my state and area, not where he is committing the crimes from. She then told me to contact my authorities and good luck. I proceed to file a police report with my local sheriff's office here in the county of Oregon, but after a few months, have yet to even receive a response. Even after calling now, they state their cases are backed up due to COVID. He harassed me for a few more months and I have documented it all, and I still to this day receive dozens of messages of people claiming someone is using my photos to catfish, all around the country, on Grindr. My neighbours in the crappy apartment I moved to after I moved out of my parents' place were hoarders to the extreme and alcoholics. We started getting roaches in our apartment about 2 months after they moved in. Then came the mice, then the rats. About a month after we moved in, we called 911 on them because we found one of them passed out in the parking lot or on the doorstep or the stairs. They came over and asked who kept dialing 911, and then they cussed us out because they didn't have insurance and had to take out numerous payday loans to cover the ambulance costs. We broke our lease and moved out after someone took a dump on our welcome mat. Talk about friendly neighbours. I was the day driver at a pizza place I was working at. On my usual grind, I hit the second house of my double and knock on the door. Oh, and it was an online order. So I get to the door, really crappy house in a nice neighborhood, but they had some really good cars. I knock and wait about a minute. And then someone just starts yelling, "Who the hell ordered pizza?" So I get a little nervous, thinking that I went to the wrong house. I hear in the background a really subtle voice say, "I did." And I'm invited inside, which I don't want to do, seeing as I had about $350 in cash on me. The dude's persistent, so I walk in and he leads me into the kitchen. As I turn into the living room/kitchen area, I see a girl who appeared to be roughly 21 in age, but had the appearance of being hit by a truck while lumping on the couch with a needle in her arm. Instantly, I wanted to run. I'd never seen anyone do heroin before, and I really didn't want to stay to see what happens. The guy tells me to put the pizzas on the counter and then begins yelling, "How are we going to pay for these?" Me crapping myself, I wanted to say that they were free, but then he pulls out a wad of cash. There was probably thousands of dollars there. I'm sweating. He pulls out guns as well and leaves them on the counter and gives me $50 on a $19 order and says to keep the change as I turn and run the hell out of there. His buddies then come in through the back door, say they got the hookup on something, and start smoking it right there and then. Me, innocent 18-year-old from the nicest part in Texas, was so scared they were just going to shoot me on the spot. I get back to my car and do about 100 back to the store and blocked them from ever ordering from us again. I lived in New York with my mum, while my dad moved to North Carolina with his new wife, and the house they live in is supposedly haunted by spirits that follow my oldest stepbrother. Now, lucky me, I have never actually seen those spirits with my eyes, but have felt and heard them. I visit each summer, and a situation I even wanted to talk to you all about was the one time me and my stepbrother Eli were home alone while my other stepbro called Gabriel was at school. It was midday and sunny out, when I had decided to go upstairs and play my PS Vita. But as I was walking up the stairs, I heard something from the attic that sounded like Gabriel screaming, "Eli, help me!" I froze. I had never been that scared in my life. Something kept me from even taking another step, since the screaming was coming from directly above my head. I looked down at Eli, who was under the stairs on the couch watching TV, and asked him if he heard Gabriel, and he said, "Screw that, bro," and just started running out of the house, and I followed. But no joke, that was by far the most fear I've ever felt in my life. Whatever was talking to us, or I guess talking to Eli, sounded evil though. It was using Gabriel's voice. The school they went to was about an hour bus ride, so Gabriel didn't arrive home until 4:30, and of course we told him all about it, and he thought we were crazy. But I would see him run into the bathroom at night sometimes too. The most I ever had seen up until that point was a door closing on its own while we were playing Smash on the 3DS. And another time at night, I felt a blanket pulled or tugged off me, but this time was different. That voice, hearing the desperation, yelling for us, still sends chill down my spine. I used to work at this rink for 5 years. I started off as a skate monitor, to a cashier, to hockey coach, and so on. Shifts would vary from around 6 a.m. to the earliest to 1 to 2 a.m. the latest, working maintenance when needed. There were always stories about the rink being haunted, starting off with the most famous story about this Zamboni driver named Bry, who would always open around 5 to 6 a.m. to prep the ice for the day. The story goes that Bry opened up the rink and started cutting the ice when he saw a little girl standing on it. Bree began to yell to the girl to get off the ice when she vanished into thin air. Bree promptly called his supervisor Carl, who I worked for, and quit on the spot. Now, though I worked the 5 years at the rink, I've felt, seen and heard countless amounts of stuff. I've seen shadows bolt around the rink, people call out my name when I'm the only one in the whole building, and an uneasy feeling while doing maintenance. But the scariest moment of all was when I was printing jerseys in what we call the dungeon, which is just the basement. It was creepy and outdated, and with only one light source, and tunnels that are partially covered that lead all under Stamford. For some old reason, we had a witch doll on the wall, and as soon as you enter the dungeon you see it. No one knows who put it there, but one night as I was printing jerseys for summer camp the next morning, for some odd reason the lights went out. As I pulled out my phone to turn on the flashlight, I was walking to the only set of stairs that led to the Zamboni Bay. I heard a child whisper coming from the room I was in. As you can imagine, after hearing that, I ran, and when I saw my co-workers, I started to cry. Thankfully, I left, and have been gone about 4 years now. I don't think I will ever go back. When I was at university, I had a good friend who was a really good-looking person, but she never had a boyfriend or showed any interest in men. I was very curious about this, so I asked her the reason why I never saw her with a boyfriend. She said there are 2 reasons. She told me that she had a boyfriend in high school who became obsessed with her. When she couldn't take it any longer, she spoke to him about mutually ending the relationship. He exploded with rage and attacked her. The second was before university she commuted to school on the train. One day she found something in a bag, a mysterious sealed envelope. She guessed that someone slipped it into her bag on board the crowded train. The letter was very simple, and it only had a few words. Love at first sight. It was a creepy kind of love letter. It wasn't addressed to her. It didn't have her name written on the envelope. It just really creeped her out. Thereafter, she found a new letter in her bag each week. She said she did nothing to encourage them, and since this freaked her out, she decided to stop traveling to school via the train. A few days after she did this, she began to receive phone calls from a number she didn't recognize. Oh God, she thought, this is freaky. She didn't answer the call, but saved the number as Stalker? A few days passed, and she set up an answer phone service to see if the stalker would leave a message, and she was surprised to find out they did. Her hands were shaking as she played the first message. Why did you go away? Why did you leave me? She said that she began to develop a fear of leaving the house, and then a fear of men. It took her years to recover from the fear instilled from not only her ex-boyfriend, but the train stalker as well. Once she had her confidence back, she attended university. I wanted to help her get a sense of trust in men again, as there are so many good men out there. I knew that I was meddling, but I wanted to help, so I thought I would invite her to a party with male and females attending, and I floated the idea to her, and she reluctantly agreed. The day of the party arrived, and I invited some of my best friends, male and female. I warned them all that my friend was nervous and asked them to be on their best behavior. My friends understood and promised to make the atmosphere great for the party. The party was held by our college mentor. I was proud of her. She spoke to a man for the first time in a long time. They had a lengthy conversation, and it was really good to see. The guy she spoke to had the exact same taste in music and movies as she, to the point where they had the same favorite song. They even came from the same area. They could have talked all night, they had so much in common. I felt like it was fate that brought these two together. When the party was over, He asked her for her contact information, and I knew this would be a big step for her, and I could tell she was happy with this, but she was too shy to show it. She said to me after the party on their way home, "I'm so happy, I can fall in love like anyone else now," and I was so happy for her. I just felt as excited as she did. A few days later, she received an email from him. She was pleased, as you can imagine, and I respected him for taking things slowly. After about a week of emailing, she came running into my room to tell me that he had invited her on a date. The day of the date rolled by. My friend didn't want to be late, so she left her home with plenty of time. He sent her an email stating, "I'll be there shortly, and I'll let you know when I arrive." My friend decided to wait at a cafe for him. The cafe was crowded, so she emailed him her number and asked him to call her when he got there. About 15 minutes passed and the phone rang. It's him, she thought, and then she pulled out her phone. On the screen, the name Stalker ? Was displayed. Her heartbeat rose. Old, familiar thoughts of fear crept forward from the back of her mind. She calmed herself and told herself, "I'm okay. My boyfriend is coming. I'll be safe." She decided to be brave and answer the phone. "Hello?" she said. "Hi, I'm here. Where are you?" It was the voice of the man she had met at the party. Her new boyfriend. There was no mistake. He must have been the one who put the letters in her bag on the train. She called me as she was leaving and all she said was, "I have no luck with men." She escaped the letter stalker with the help of her friends and colleagues. I don't know what they did, but they made him back off. I am shocked and somewhat in awe at the stalker's fascination and persistence with my friend. I wish he'd have just left her alone. I consider most of 1996 to be a rebuilding year in my life. I was 25 years old, fresh out of a relationship that crashed and burned right before the wedding. So deep was the crater and widespread fallout that I had to move to a different state to avoid my to-be father-in-law's friends in law enforcement, who were making sure I spent time roadside with them at least 4 times in the first 2 months after it all ended. I started over in a new place with a lack of resources and connections that were going to make it hard for me to get back into shape before I turned 30. Still, I was free and beholden to none but my creditors. So I had that going for me. I lived in my means and rented a townhouse in a long row of properties in a less than reputable part of town. I didn't have time to do a walkthrough before I moved in. In fact, I rented the place unseen, based on the online ad alone. It was close to the job, which was great because someone trashed my car the week before I moved out, and I ended up driving a beat-up Dodge pickup that I bought with the last of my savings. Once settled, I was locked into the rental for 12 months, which oddly enough gave me a sense of permanence in my new surroundings and helped me get to work on my new life and career in human capital management and training services. My unit was at the end of a block of 12 with 2 bedrooms up top with a master bath and half bath in the living area. It was not a massive space, but it felt empty for lack of any furniture. I slept on an inflatable mattress my first 3 months and used folding chairs and a card table to eat and watch television. The block was a place where people were either on their way up or back down. Young kids in their first home, recently divorced with kids that downturned from society in one way or another. There were fights, domestic and otherwise, throughout the night. Drunken parties and birthday galas took over the block on weekends, but nobody ever interacted with other families for some reason. No one knew anyone else's name or business. At least, that's what the cops told me the first time they stopped by to ask me if I'd heard or witnessed something going on the block. My immediate neighbors were just weird, like a space monkey on your lawn, inviting you to an anal probe kind of weird. It was a circus of 3. The short, wild-haired woman looking like an off-brand troll doll with big pink hair that defied logic, and a malfunctioning soundtrack that only shrieked when provoked. The tall, thin man looked like an average, bald human might appear in an elongated funhouse mirror. I never knew how old they were, but they resembled old, well-worn furniture, like the contents of any elderly couple's storage locker, old and ready to be discarded. Troll Doll Lady and Funhouse Man were not fond of talking to neighbors or anyone. They were troubled people. Their fights would bleed through the shared walls and get louder when talking outside. They knocked my only hanging art from the wall when one threw the other against the other side. Funhouse Man liked to take his morning coffee in the sunshine, standing behind the screen of his front door in tidy whities and an oversized flannel shirt. He was often the first person I'd encounter in the morning on my way to work, and he would stare off across the playground into the woods, as if in a trance, long before I left the townhouse, and probably long after my truck took me away. The cops knew them by their real names. There had been a child living there, but he or she had been removed from the home. A frequent guest in their Little David Lynch sitcom was a guy called Chuck, so named because Troll Lady would yell his name every 10 minutes anytime he was in the house. Chuck was a long-haul trucker who parked his sleeper rig across the street every few weeks. For some reason, he didn't shower inside, so Saturday morning he would often run the garden hose over the fenced-in area in the back to take a cold shower, which was a lovely sight for the first time, when I didn't know what was going on. He sometimes walked out back to take a long beer piss in the runoff drain. His aversion to indoor plumbing was never explained to me, but I am forever grateful I never walked back out to catch him pooping a squat in the tree line. For about 6 months I tolerated the noise, let the neighbors be the bad guys, and call the police when the fights went on too loud for too long, or when they got all drunk and played their 80s punk records through the night, and engaged in songs of their people howling at the moon. I got to a point where I was making enough money to buy real furniture and rent a better place. But I still had a lease to honor, so I bought a sofa, a real bed, and a desk set for an office. It was still a minimalist affair, but comfortable. The townhouse felt like my home for once, and suddenly the intrusions from the neighbors were twice as annoying. One night, Troll Doll Lady got into a fight with a pizza delivery driver who knocked on her door by mistake, but wouldn't give her the pizza. I only know this because the pizza and its box hit my front window at different spots. This shrieking, pink-haired witch assaulted the driver, which led to a light show by the police. I was left to clean the pizza off the window and called the office to replace the window. They refused until the neighbors agreed to pay, so I enjoyed a cracked window for a month before the court accepted her guilty plea over property damage. Her arrest was around the same time that residents on our block and the next one over began reporting burglaries, and I was asked by police if I had any information or experienced anything odd. Other than the 3 geek circus next door, I told them I did not. Fortunately, my work and social life were on the rebound. I met a girl and we hit it off, though we stayed far from my house during the early part of our relationship, so I began spending more time away from home, though I would often come home late to the neighbors in a loud state of either bliss or rage. During the day, maintenance worked to replace the insulation and update the HVAC system along the attic spaces along the entire block. I didn't think much about it because the work was done while I was gone in the daytime and assumed the property managers would be coming into my place at some point to access my attic. Probably the last one, as they started on the far end from mine. Quickly, I lost track of the project. Well, one night I came home, and something felt a little off. The front door was locked, the windows intact, and the back door secured. However, it felt and even smelled a little off. Sometimes I could smell the tobacco and weed upstairs when it filtered up and over the attic space, but I was sure someone had been there. I cleared the house in a short, quiet march, as my dad and Marine taught me, but found no one and nothing missing. My computers, 2 TVs, everything was intact, except I went to grab a beer from the fridge to calm my nerves and found a 6-pack missing. I was sure I had 2 scratch batch stout packs from my last visit to Stewie's microbrew. The loaf of bread seemed to be a little shorter than the morning before by several slices. I couldn't be sure, but I thought I might be missing some other items as well, but wasn't sure if that was just the growing anxiety over being robbed. I wondered if maintenance had been by to inspect the window or work in the attic and help themselves to snacks and drinks. It would explain the musty smell in my apartment, and given the people I knew who owned it and managed the property, it would not surprise me if a couple of their day laborers took a load off for a bit. The smell was most unpleasant upstairs, but in my office, which was opposite the neighbor's wall, so it wasn't lingering dank. It was clearly gym funk. I immediately assumed laborer because it made the most sense, so I didn't report it to the police that night. The next morning, however, I discovered my medications missing from my cabinet. All of them. My Lexapro, my emergency anxiety medication, and my other bottles were gone. I checked the windows and doors again, now in a near panic, and called off work for the first time using a burglary as my excuse. I was the 7th house in my 2 townhouse blocks to be hit in the past 2 weeks. The 5th in my block, and one of the 5 without signs of forced entry. The police wouldn't tell me much about the other incidents, and didn't seem to believe that I locked my doors until I reminded them who I lived next to. By that point, I really didn't want to live in that place anymore. It no longer felt like home. I was sharing it with something, and I felt like it lingered in the air around me. There was a feeling of dread, a sense of violation knowing there was someone out there who was inside your life without permission. Once removed, it feels like living in a home without walls. And there was a serial burglar in a neighborhood where the cops traditionally let it work out its own problems and carry away the remains. A week after the break-in, a few things happened to mess up my world further. First, Troll Doll Lady returned home, and because she was on house arrest, a welcome party brought out all the freaks on Friday night. Second, because I was a dumbass, I had to come home and pick up a few things I needed to spend the weekend with my new girlfriend. As she was already in the truck, and we were going to the highway and out of town, there was no other choice but to bring her home with me. The lot, including my spaces, were filled with what looked like gridlock in a demolition derby, so I had to park a good distance away. Third, she insisted on seeing the inside of my townhouse and taking a pee before hitting the road, so I had to introduce her to the freak show next door before even setting foot inside. On the way up the walk to the front door, we encountered the funhouse man in the open doorway, gatekeeper to the drunk dumbassery inside. He was wearing his morning apparel, briefs and a long shirt, except with a can of Red Dog instead of coffee in his hand. Funhouse man looked at us coming up the walk, and spoke to me for the first time in 7 months. "You tapped that," I think he said, his wet mouth spitting the words and his dead eyes scoping my girl. I shifted to put myself between them on the walk as we closed in on the door and fished my keys out of my pants. Funhouse man panicked, letting out a squeal before diving inside and slamming the door. The party was silent instantly. My girl was unnerved by all of this and lost all of the thrill of being with me in that place, and I registered her immediate disapproval. She didn't even want to pee there. I remember making some excuse saying it's a temporary thing and the first step to living better. But it was the beginning of the end for us, like she caught me cheating with Troll Doll Lady. I didn't realize the party had spilled out into the front lawn and in front of my townhouse until I opened the door to see Chuck, the trucker, standing under my porch lamp looking drunk, stupid and angry. He was joined by a few strangers who looked equal parts in the same condition, and also like I had just fired the lot of them from the sideshow. I stopped inside the screen door, trying to think of anything to say, clever or otherwise. Chuck, the trucker, started the conversation. "You go at Kenny?" "What?" "I ask you if you went after Kenny in his own home." Nothing like that happened, but I knew immediately that my reality was not shared by those gathered in front of my own home. No, he said something. I got close to hear he squealed and then ran inside. End of story. I was okay at the end of the first 2 sentences, but my anger got the best of me by the start of the third, and it did little to calm the group, which had swollen to about a dozen people looking for blood or things to break. Chuck was not convinced by my answer and took a few steps forward to open my screen door. He put a hand on the knob and stopped. "You step out here or I come in there." "Go take a crap in a tree. You're not coming in here, and I'm not bleeding over that weirdo friend of yours. You can go beat each other up like you normally do." The words stopped there because Chuck had punched a hole in my screen to get to my face. I fell back and accidentally tackled my now firmly ex-girlfriend. Fortunately, I didn't have much in the way of furniture to break on the way down. The only thing going for me at that moment was the miraculous arrival of the police, drawn by the parking fiasco and the noise. My face was broken, my newest ex had a bloody nose and sprained shoulder, and I was out a good $400 in deposit for a weekend that would never happen. In short order, a few important things occurred. Chuck went to jail, and the charges against him would become the least of his problems. The party turned into a story time where partygoers spun their best yarn about how I insulted, assaulted, beat, or did sexual things to Kenny against his will, i.e. the funhouse man. I was questioned about the encounter by police, and spent time with an EMT who I totally failed to impress enough to get her number. I was let go as several of the partygoers were arrested for either public drunkenness, disorderly conduct, or outstanding warrants. I'm sure this warmed me to the neighbors and their friends. My weekend companion was rescued from it all by a friend who drove her out of my life forever. You would think 8 things in short order would be enough. I had to continue living next to these screw-ups for at least a few more months, and I was going to spend those months terrified by what they might do to my property while I was working, or if the burglars came back. However, I woke up the next morning to see the neighbors cleaning up the party. Glass and aluminium, plastic and cardboard boxes, 2 full-sized bins. Credit where it's due. They recycled. From my what the hell position in my bedroom window, I noticed 2 of the bottles stood out from the Keystone, Red Dog, and Milwaukee labels. They were the scratch batch labels from my 6-pack. Now there was a chance that they were brought to the party by a guest with better taste in beer than their friends, but that was a very big coincidence. My brain presented a question that I could not answer. Where is the attic access in the townhouse? I just assumed there was one somewhere but never actually looked or came across it. How did maintenance get into it? While totally unrelated to the beer bottle on a conscious level, my paranoia and cynical nature collaborated on a series of connections as I looked around the house for a drop that I'd missed for months. My brain worked in its weird way to line up facts in such a way that would sound insane if I wrote it all out. I went upstairs. My office was where the funk smell had been most poignant. I looked up and around and decided to check the closet. I didn't check it before because there was nothing in it. On the carpet, I noticed a light dusting of drywall and paint flecks. I assumed it was from rubbing on the sliding door against the wall, but it concentrated at the side by the wall and not equally along the track. The closet only had hanging shelves on the interior side. Looking up, I expected to see an attic access port, but found a jagged square carved into the drywall ceiling. Maintenance was not exactly flip this shack quality, but I didn't think even they would have used a box cutter to carve a hole in my ceiling, and none of them were skinny enough to fit through that. Funhouse Man was skinny enough to potentially weasel up and down. The scuff marks on the inside of the closet were pretty telling. It took a while for the police to make their way over in response to my non-emergency call, but it quickly gathered their interest when the first responding officer reported that everyone missed the first time they did a half-assed search of my home. 3 unmarked cars arrived after the initial squad car. My neighbors were uncharacteristically quiet once the first cruiser rolled up around noon. I offered a folding ladder, and the police looked up into the blisteringly hot attic. A hole had been cut through the insulation, and a spot in the corner wide enough for a small or slender person to fit through. I was questioned again downstairs for about an hour before I heard more voices upstairs. Then I remember going up there. Before I could ask, a familiar face appeared at my door. My landlord, Ahmed, looked concerned and astonished, which was a new expression after the third after his "can I take your money" and general resting "get lost" face. "What happened?" he asked. "What's going on? Are you all right?" He walked into my home without invitation and up to me on my sofa. I asked him if he was there to fix my cracked window. Everything else happened without my direct involvement. I remained a guest in my own home for most of the day as police took pictures and marked up and down my stairs. I learnt that my assumption about the attic work was wrong, that workers had access to specific units to get around the firewalls between them. In fact, there were holes in the firewall that allowed workers to enter the roof in one unit and run the entire length of the building. It was a measure that saved time and footsteps, but was a violation of several laws and codes, meaning that Ahmed's life was about to become much more complex and expensive. These gaps in the firewalls also allowed someone to drill a hole in their own ceiling and run the length of 11 other homes, walking on the same boards laid by the property owners that muffled their presence. Every single unit in that block had a similar hole to the one in my ceiling. Furthermore, at one time, the building had been wired for cable through the roof, and holes that had been cut to fish cable into the upstairs bedrooms had been plugged up years earlier during an upgrade. Some of those patches had been replaced with removable plugs, giving someone a clear view into various bedrooms in the attic. Police found a step stool with a rope tied to the top step. It was stashed in the corner of the roof over my next-door neighbor's unit. But that's not the weirdest thing. Though all the evidence pointed to the main access point being the smaller bedroom in my neighbor's unit, the police did not arrest Funhouse Man or Troll Lady for the crime. Around 3 in the afternoon, police had recovered items stolen from other units along with various controlled substances. Troll Doll Lady was arrested for violating the terms of her bond. Funhouse Man was taken in for the drugs. And I was shocked to see a third person, not Chuck, walk out of the townhouse in cuffs. I'd never met him before. He was rail thin, thinner than Funhouse Man by half, an old man's face in a young man's body with scars and bruises all over his skin that I've only ever seen on corpses, white and waxy. He was naked except for soiled basketball shorts, and he literally recoiled as if allergic to the outside air and the sun, and had to be dragged shoeless into the cruiser. I don't know who that kid was, but I got the feeling that he never left the townhouse, ever. Maybe not even the attic. The thought that this skeletal creep was looking in on me and had access to my life makes me overly cautious these days. I have eyes everywhere in my home, and I took pains to inspect the smallest spaces in and around the property. I often wake up in the night, seeing that face peering at me through a window or from the darkness. It's been a long time, and everyone I mentioned in this story by name is dead. I don't know about the kid though. I never got a name, and I was unable to find him in any police records. Maybe he didn't really exist. Maybe he didn't show up in any records and is languishing in prison as a John Doe. Or maybe he's out there lurking in some upper level of an apartment building, or hiding inside the basements or walls. I've rarely ever felt truly home since then. I deliver for a restaurant in town, Angelo's Pizza. It's the name and some of the best pizza in town they have. The nights aren't always busy, and I have a few minutes to kill here and there between deliveries, so I bring my laptop to work. I do music, writing, and occasionally play chess to fill in the gaps. It was a Saturday night, and surprisingly it wasn't too busy. At around 11 p.m, a delivery is ready. My boss hands me the food and I walk out the back door to my car. A short 7-minute drive is fueled by the delicious aroma of fried mushrooms, Canadian bacon pizza, and the screams of my music, which gives me a short adrenaline rush and hypes me to the last stop of the night. I arrive at the address. It's the Heritage Inn, the only hotel in our town of about 9,000. The place is located on the edge of town and is a casual-style, 2-floor hotel with a not-so-vibrant dull appeal. The building is made up of regular drab bricks, spaced with normal boring windows every few feet, and the roof is shingled with a dark brown. At night it looks even duller, and tonight the parking lot is next to empty, but is filled with a few half-dimmed light posts, giving it an unnerving feeling. The feeling that makes me want to strategically place my car keys between my fingers, just in case. I pull up to the entrance, which has the most appealing feature to the outside of the building, a 9-foot overhang. I enter the hotel through a single door and then into the concierge's room. I go up to the girl to let her know I'm heading up, and I struggle to read the smudge writing Room 101. I tell her. To the right of the desk is a door leading to the most eye-catching feature of the entire hotel, the pool. It looks magnificent at night, when it's vacant and calm, with the dim light reflecting off the water on the beige walls. It's almost a surreal and eerie environment, and yet it seems so inviting. I go down the hallway, past the out-of-date vending machines and past the dark and noisy laundry room. The hall is long and not very brightly lit. Like everything else, it seemed. Fortunately, the door to the stairs is soon after the laundry room directly to the right. As I'm walking up the stairway, I can't help but think about the story I heard of this very same hotel. Whether it was factual or just a story, it still gives me a bone-chilling feeling. A murder took place here. One of the maids went on her daily walkthrough, to which room I don't know, and found the sheets of both beds soaked in blood. The police were informed, but no one was found in the room, nor were any bodies discovered in the hotel. There was more to the story, but I couldn't remember anything, probably due to me terrified of the nature and the atmosphere that the hotel had to offer this night. Either way, all that kept passing through my mind were images of a corpse rotting away under some bed or under the floor. I near the top of the stairs, and I see the room number 101 through the glass window. A feeling of relief passes over me, knowing I won't have to go down the next darkened hallway. I open the door into the hallway and stand in front of the room. I look around me at both ends of the hall to reassure myself I'm not alone. I knock on the door, and I wait a few seconds as I carefully balance the pizza and bag with one arm and the order ticket in the other hand. I hear a mumbled voice approach the door. As the door slowly creaks open, a man appears. An instant flashback to Jurassic Park races in my head, as the man bore a striking similarity to John Hammond, both age and appearance being around the age of 60 with white hair and a beard, and a round face with glasses. The man is on the phone and opens the door all the way. He makes a waving gesture, informing me to come inside. As I get a good view of the entire room, and I'm just about to take a step into the room, I notice something that is in no way in the realm of a normal hotel room, and I abruptly halt my stride. 3 people in total I see. The first is the John Hammond doppelganger at the door, who is now seemingly pretending to talk on the phone as he hides his head behind the door. The second is a woman who could possibly be a wife or girlfriend of the old man. She looks like she's in her 50s. She is sitting on a chair directly across the room from the door, looking up, watching TV in the corner. The third is a girl who I am 100% sure is within 13 to 15 years of age, lying on her stomach, top of the bed. This is the part that unsettled me. Aside from underwear, as in panties, she's not wearing any clothes. And as a total stranger is at a wide open door, she makes no effort to conceal herself or even acknowledge my presence. She didn't seem to realize or care that she was half naked, almost like she was drugged. Then I noticed the woman on the chair as she periodically looks over towards me, totally aware of the situation. Then I noticed the man at the door, who at least 2 minutes after I arrived is still looking through his wallet behind the door. Or so I assume that's what he's doing. I got the feeling like he was stalling. He hangs up the phone and apologizes to me for the wait with a raspy, very creepy voice. I tell him the price and we exchange the food for the money. Between the exchange, I notice the girl on the bed turn to face me for a second. It's at this brief moment I was able to stare into her eyes. They seemed vacant and void of any emotion, like they had been stolen from her, like she was lost. She turned back to the TV without a single change in her face. The man notices I look at the girl, then turns and looks at her and back at me. He stares at me for a few seconds and asks me, "You sure you don't want to come in?" He said it with such a large but noticeably fake smile. I'm scared. It scared me and plunged me deep into a feeling of dread as my heart dropped. It was one of those moments where you know without a doubt that something is not right. Right would be an understatement, actually. This felt like an eternity of darkness overcame me, like some evil entity was piercing my soul. We made our exchange. Nothing more was needed. What did this guy want? I firmly declined his offer as I shook my head from side to side. He stared at me with that smile for a few more long seconds. The woman was still on the chair looking at me, and the girl was not moving on the bed. He stared, still smiling. "All right then, you have a good night," and closed the door. I stood outside the door for a minute, thinking I was in momentary shock. I put the money in my pouch, then headed back down the stairs. I informed the girl at the front desk about the situation, but I don't think she took it as seriously as I did. Maybe I didn't explain it as well for her. I exited the hotel, got into my car and began driving back through town. No music now. I needed a quiet moment, and decided for whatever reason to call my mum and explain the situation. I explained the delivery from hell to her, and she hastily told me to hang up and call the police. I did so but got no answer. I called my mum back and said I couldn't get through. She tried calling and I waited. It's been 2 days since that delivery. I apparently had a message on my phone but didn't receive it due to phone trouble from the police who were returning my call. They were interested in hearing my story and seemed pretty concerned. All the probable scenarios, both within the realm of reality and exaggeration, that could have happened that night, have been swirling through my thoughts. Did I make a choice that would have possibly saved my own life? And could I have indirectly witnessed the beginnings to something terrible? 4 years later now, and I always think about what could have happened to that girl. What if she was found dead 50 miles away and I never knew about it? Could I have done more to help? Did she even need help? Or was that whole night just one sick misunderstanding? I wonder what would have happened to me if I'd have got into that room. I hate visions of needles, knives, or blood, and cameras running through my mind. Just what on earth were those people doing? My husband and I moved into our apartment about 2 years ago. Ever since, we've always had weird things and encounters happening. In our closet, we have a hatch to the attic. We are on the top floor, and it sits in the ceiling and can be locked with 2 latches, much like the ones you see in a public bathroom at the store that slide and turn to lock in place. Multiple times we've heard the latch move, and when we go to check, they are unlocked. A few times the hatch itself has been moved and not fully closed. We have heard what sounds like footsteps and people walking above us, but there's not a way for anyone to get into our attic or the roof. We've had items moved, pictures fall off the wall, lights flicker, even after changing light bulbs. Blinds by our patio doors randomly start swinging, and things get knocked off tables or counters. My husband recently had surgery and can't move his arms very much to put shirts on. One day, he felt small, childlike hands help him pull his shirt over his head and pull it down. We have 2 dogs and 2 cats who really don't get along, but one day, the cat got into the kitchen and sat next to the dog. All 3 were staring in the kitchen. We've done saging and cleansing, and that does make things stop for a few days, but it always starts up again. I really do believe there is something in the apartment that wants to make itself known, but any time we try and record anything, everything stops. I'm hoping something will happen soon. I was a toddler, no more than 3 years old, when my family and I lived in a small rented house in Vermont. There are a few things I remember about it: a spiral staircase, a large field, the cold cement floor on my bedroom, and a part of the house that I was strangely drawn to: the basement. I was, and still am, a wanderer. I also don't mind being alone. Both of these qualities made the basement a sort of getaway. I wasn't allowed down there by myself, but a handful of times I was able to sneak my way down there. I remember crawling down the stairs like they were a ladder, being overly cautious of falling, as I had done before. Sometimes I would hear mumbling coming from somewhere in the basement, but it was too quiet for anything to be discernible. When I got to the last step and turned around, I would see her over in the corner, a mannequin with blonde hair and an expressionless face. All I would think is that she looked like the mannequin in JCPenney's or Kmart. I never once thought it was odd that she was there. Some basements have exercise equipment. We have a mannequin. Years later, and living in a different home, I decided to bring this up with my mum. Why would we have a store mannequin in our basement? My mother just gave me a strange look and laughed and said, "We never once had a mannequin in any place where we lived." To this day, I still have no idea what it was that I saw in the basement. There is a huge park near my house. On weekends and public holidays it gets really busy. However, at night the atmosphere of the park is entirely different. Back when I had just moved to the area, I was unpacking. I had so much to do and there wasn't an end in sight, so I decided to go to the park for a change of pace. The park had swings and slides, plenty of stuff. Next to a public toilet there was a phone booth illuminated in the darkness, and it crept me out a bit. Later, when I had finally finished unpacking, it was around 1 a.m, and I decided to go to a convenience store. The whole time I was walking, I felt as if someone was watching me. I didn't want to look over my shoulder at any point. There was the phone booth. Ordinarily, I would walk past it without paying it much attention, but for some reason I stopped and stared blankly at it. After a few minutes, I snapped out of it and ran to the convenience store. I bought a few things, sweets, a bento box, and was on my way home. Halfway through the park, I realized I was in desperate need of the toilet. It was unavoidable. I had to use the toilet at the park. At that time of night, I was the only one in the park. It was very frightening, and as I was washing my hands, I heard a phone ring. I checked, but it wasn't my mobile phone. It was coming from somewhere very close to the toilet, though. The payphone was ringing. What perfect timing. Two thoughts entered my mind. The first, curiosity. What if I answered it? The second, fear. Do not answer it. In the end, fear won. I ran back to the house while the phone rang behind me. Back home, I sat down on my sofa and tried to organize my thoughts. I was still thinking about the phone booth. From my window, I could see the park and the phone booth, and I wasn't sure if it was still ringing. I watched it for a few moments as a man appeared from the nearby toilet. The light of the toilet illuminated him. In his right hand, he was holding a mobile phone. In his left, something sharp, like a tool or a knife. It only took 2 minutes to run back to my house from the park. I was just there. I thought there was no one else in the toilet with me. My suspicion was that the man was waiting in one of the toilet stalls and dialed the payphone number, and would creep up to whoever answered the phone from behind and murder them. What if my curiosity were greater than my fear? Whenever I think about what could have happened, I shudder. Life can change in the blink of an eye, and you're not always prepared for it. I certainly wasn't. In the year 2000, I had been married to my husband about 3 years. We were having a pretty steady life. I had just left my job and was about to have a baby. After having the baby, we were overjoyed. We had just moved into a new house, and because of my husband's job, we were able to afford it and were looking and hoping to get somewhere a bit bigger in the next few years. My baby was only about 4 weeks old when out of nowhere tragedy struck, and my husband was hit by an idiot driver who was on the wrong side of the road and died in the collision. There was nothing I could have done. That week, I buried my husband, and my life was thrown into turmoil, not only because of the huge emotional shift that had to happen for me, but, of course, the disappearance of the financial support that he provided. His job gave little in financial aid after his passing, and of course, without an income, I had to find work for myself. My job was very specialized, and it was a bit hard to find a job with childcare needs at that time for me. So after a lot of juggling, I managed to sort out a steady income, but it wasn't as much as I had before, and when the lease ended, I unfortunately relinquished the house. That was the last time I ever saw my husband alive. It was a hard thing to do, but for the best, I suppose. My daughter and I initially moved back in with my parents, but they were a bit overbearing, so after a while, I decided to find somewhere where we could both live together happily for the time being. My job wasn't in the greatest area, but deciding that proximity to the office was probably best, I took residence in one of the cheap houses available nearby. It was grotty to say the least, absolutely minuscule, a very small living space, 1 bedroom and 1 bathroom, but it was enough for my tiny family. The loss of my husband and complete collapse of my life thus far was still taking a huge toll on my life, and I wasn't myself, but I had to try and be strong for my baby girl. After I arrived at the new house and got settled in, I realized that my neighbors were never in, if I even had any. Next door was a house that looked like it hadn't been done up in at least 20 years. The grass was long on the front lawn, litter was thrown everywhere, and it looked like no one ever came in or out of that place. The windows were so dirty, even though the curtains were never drawn, you could never see inside, and on the few times I arrived or was outside at night, I would never see any lights on or hear any noises from the house. I thought the house might have been abandoned or condemned, and never really thought much about it. In the weeks that followed the adjustment of my life, I started to get really uneasy feelings while being in my home. I told myself it was just the grief and that it would take a long time to heal. But then something happened that changed all that. One morning at around 6 a.m., I was having a shower. I tried to shower before my daughter woke up, and as I was showering, I swore I heard something on the ceiling. Instinctually, I look up, but as the shower was steamy, I didn't actually see anything. After I got back from work that day, I look around the bathroom and see nothing. I told myself it was just a house noise. One thing that is probably worth mentioning was that mine and the neighbor's house were connected by a shared wall. The bathroom happened to be on the shared wall we had. Another conclusion I got to was that it could have been from the neighbor's house, but as I said previously, as I'd never seen any form of human activity there, my instinct told me otherwise. So, I tried to forget about it. As the weeks went by, I found one of the strangest things I did find. It was a sliver of ceiling. It looked like it had been cut, and when I looked up after finding it on the floor, there was indeed a hole in the ceiling. If it had been cut, it had been done very badly and very roughly, but with an amorphous shape. I looked up and wondered how the hell it had fallen down. I tried to get the stepladder to put it back up, but wasn't tall enough to slot the piece back in. Frustrated, I didn't know what was going on, and resolved to call the landlord the next day to try and get it sorted out. I left that patch of ceiling on the kitchen counter and forgot all about it for many months. My landlord was never called. I completely forgot about it. Then, weeks later, I find another sliver of ceiling, but this one in the bathroom. I was looking up at where the hole was, and it was in between the shower and the toilet. This time it was starting to creep me out. If someone was in the ceiling, well, as unlikely as it was, they would be able to see me shower and do my business, which really freaked me out. It was a very tiny piece of ceiling though, and after finding the forgotten piece from the other room, I resolved to this time call the landlord. When I finally got around to calling the landlord, I asked him about this and if he could please fix it. He told me he would send someone round, but said that we shouldn't go up into the attic as that wasn't in the lease agreement. So, I left it at that. Days went by, and after chasing him, he never sent anyone over to fix it, and I quickly forgot, dealing with lots of stuff at the time, so it wasn't at the forefront of my thoughts. Well, that of course all changed. A few weeks later, I was just about to take a shower and was sitting on the toilet when I hear movement from above, and a tiny amount of dust falls from the ceiling. Instinctually, I look up, and that's when I hear shuffling, leaving my attic space and going towards the derelict neighbor's house next door. I cover myself and start shrieking. I was sure someone was spying down on me. This time, I call the police. After an interesting conversation between the landlord and the police, they managed to open the attic on my part of the house. It turns out that someone had been living in the derelict house that the landlord owned, but didn't actually rent out to anyone. It was a homeless man. He had been living there for who knows how long, and had cut the holes in my ceiling and had been spying on me. I felt so violated. Someone had been spying on me while I was naked, while I was in the bathroom, and it repulsed me beyond words. I told the landlord that I wanted to move out, that this was unacceptable, and it could have all been avoided if he could have just fixed the damn holes when I asked him to. The police didn't get involved at this point, but their presence being quite pronounced, I think that's why he relented and let us terminate the lease early. I ended up moving back with my parents' house and got an apology, my full deposit, and half a month's rent back as another form of apology. So that's something, I suppose. But it really destroyed my sense of trust. And honestly, I'm always checking for holes and look up at the ceiling whenever I enter a new space, check for double-sided mirrors in public bathrooms and the like, because you never know what kind of pervert could be watching you when you're trying to do your private business. It really shattered that for me. I just hope that it never happens to my daughter.
About 12 years ago, in a suburb of Baton Rouge, there was a suspected serial killer on the loose. The running joke in our store was that it was one of us because the murders were happening in and around our delivery area. There was a seedy motel by a remote industrial complex right off the highway. Everyone hated having to deliver there because it was mostly shady characters or truck drivers, and none of them ever tipped. I got stuck going there at around 11 p.m. on a Friday night. As I approached the room, I could see the door was slightly open. I knocked and said, "Hello?" and there was no answer. Through the crack, I could see a person sitting, so I nudged the door open a little. It was a frumpy, middle-aged naked woman tied to a chair, blindfolded and gagged. She nods, as if to acknowledge my presence, and turned her head in the direction of the nightstand. There was a note and some money on it. I scanned the room and didn't see any sign of anyone else, i.e. the person who'd tied her up. I read the note, and it was something to the effect of, "This is our 20th anniversary, and this was my fantasy. Please look all you want, but don't touch, and keep the change. P.S. My husband is hiding and watching, so don't try anything." There was a $20 tip. I thought for sure this was my last delivery I'd ever be making. I snatched the money and left the pizzas on the bed and backed out slowly. I have never been more creeped out in my life. Fortunately, there was no murder for me at that hotel that night. Back in '84, when I was 14, I lived in Spokane with my mum and her significant other. It was an older, smaller house. The upstairs was a converted attic that had been split into 2 rooms. One room was on the top of the stairs. I set that section up as my living room. Then a door, and an identically sized room that was my bedroom. The ceiling was low and slanted down on the sides, so there was only a strip about 3 inches wide along the center where you could stand. Our dog was a rescue, and I blamed previous owners for his absolute fear of the stairs that led to my room. He would cower and whimper at the foot of the stairs, and when I tried to show him my room, I thought he was afraid of the stairs, so I carried him up to show him my room. He starts whining and yelping. He was all the way down on his belly and released his bowels and ran downstairs and out of the house. I didn't think too much of it, and never felt any bad feeling up there. After about a week of living there, I would wake up most nights around 3 a.m. and would hear very faint classical music. I thought it was neighbours or my mum or something along those lines, and didn't worry about it. Then one night I slept with the door between my rooms open. When I woke up at around 3 a.m, I could hear the music, but I noticed a glow coming from my living room. My stereo was on. I stood in the doorway and could see it was turned to the local AM classical music station. The volume was way down. I slept with the light on and the door closed that night. The next morning my stereo was turned up to the classic FM station that I listened to. Nearly every night, I would wake up and hear this stereo playing classical music. Because I never felt dread or fear, I decided it was a friendly ghost, and I started to tune the radio to FM version of the station. They broadcast the same thing on AM and FM, but FM sounded way better, with the volume low, but not as low as the ghost would have it. It was my way of trying to be nice to it. We moved out a few months after we moved in. At the time, my mum said it was because they raised the rent, but she told me a few years later that she was tired of the ghost in her room. She said that it would open the curtains and doors while she was sleeping. I'm a skeptic, and I try really hard to believe that I was just sleepwalking. I have been a paranormal investigator for more than a year, and my investigations have been quite interesting to say the least. There was this one time we were investigating in an abandoned Greek hospital in Athens, and near the end, we decided to split up and investigate by ourselves. But one of the 3 members would go to the basement by himself, and I was the lucky one. I only took the voice recorder and the EMF, while the others got the spirit box and thermal cameras. In the basement, things started off relatively slow. No spikes on the EMF, no voices captured on the recorder, and the atmosphere was good. Everything changed when I started being a little bit more provoking. I knew I shouldn't do it, but I thought it was the only way I would capture something. To be honest, I really was running my mouth and saying things I shouldn't. At some point the EMF spiked all the way to the end, and then it stopped and went back to normal. That's when I left. Going home at around 4:30, I decided to start analysing the footage of our video cameras. We had some EMF spikes when we were investigating all together, and some weird voices from the spirit box and a weird figure on one thermal camera. I left my EVP session at the end because I thought it was uneventful. I put my headphones on and started listening for the 25-minute EVP session. The first 18 minutes were boring, and then near the 22-minute mark, I had already started provoking quite a bit. That's when I heard a voice say, "Don't speak, stay quiet." And the funny/weird thing was that a minute earlier the EMF had spiked red. Do you think it's a coincidence? The whole time I was in the basement I had a huge headache. I wonder if the spirits were playing with me. And just for those interested, this whole thing happened in Greek, but is written in English for your convenience. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
This happened when I was in high school. It was summer vacation, and 4 of my male friends and 1 female decided we should go check out a haunted abandoned villa. It was in the middle of the woods. We didn't want to get caught going in there, so we went when it was dark, just past 11 p.m. We were fearless back in those days. None of us knew the first thing about hauntings or ghosts. We just stood outside trying to figure out how to go about it. I suggested we split up into 2 small teams, but the others were too nervous to be separated. The villa had 3 floors, and 1 appeared to be underground. We decided to start from the top and work our way down to the basement. We assembled a line. I brought the biggest flashlight out of the group, so I was voted to be up front. We went in the villa. I cannot say the atmosphere was odd, or that it was especially spooky in there, but what freaked me out was the fact that we were constantly moving further and further from the exit. A feeling of anxiety, like there was no escape, overcame us. We went down the corridor from the lobby, and my friends were whipping doors open and shining flashlights in the room. We didn't see anything of interest, and nothing scary happened. Some of the rooms were locked. Don't know why though. It was creepy imagining what might be on the other side. We had no idea how long the villa had been abandoned. The building was pretty sound, except from the odd, squeaky floorboard and broken window. Some debris in the corridor too. When you're in an abandoned house in the woods, all the sounds you make sound very loud. The crunch of broken glass, etc., was magnified. I was worried about us getting spotted or caught. As we began to ascend to the 2nd floor, the girl in our group paused and said something. "Is this blood?" She found some sort of dark mark on the wall. Just as she said that, my torchlight fell on a small round ball on the ground. There were lots of them. I realized there were BB or airgun pellets. It was freaking us out a bit. Our friend was sure that she was looking at blood, so she stepped back and bumped into something. Something dropped from the ceiling, narrowly missing her. The sound of a metallic object impacting on the ground ran through the villa. We thought that there was some kind of booby trap. Who would set it up and why? What goes on here, we asked each other. She was so freaked out by what happened, she didn't want to go any further. Her boyfriend, who was with us, took her back to the car, which just left the 3 of us. We wanted to make our way to the basement. Somehow knowing that people have been here made us feel a little more confident. While we were on the basement floor, we made sure to check all the rooms. These were different rooms. Weird windowless rooms where the walls were all painted black. We didn't like the vibe down there at all. I could tell the others wanted to get back upstairs as much as I did, but we'd come this far. We had to see everything. We approached one door at the end of the corridor. There was a sign on the door that read, "Boiler Room." Beneath the sign there were some words scratched, which chilled me to the bone. "Don't open the door. The children will get out." We ran for it, but before we did, I swear I heard something move behind the door. Even if it was a prank by the people who hang out there, even if it was nothing at all, in that moment, something deep down inside me told me to get the hell out of that place. I'm sure it was a prank. I mean, it had to be. Right? When I first came to look at the apartment I'm living at now, the people that were moving out were the ones to show the apartment to us. There was no one in the building present. They were a real scumbag-looking pair. The guy just says out of the blue that he was going to prison and that his wife could not afford the place anymore. So I didn't think too much of it, and we move in a few weeks later. While talking to some of the neighbors, there are 2 townhouses and 2 buildings in the same development, they asked me if I knew what happened in my apartment. I was like, no. Then they proceeded to tell me that the dude that lived there was off to prison for sexually assaulting a little girl in that apartment. Talk about information I didn't need to know. The worst part is that his wife got a new place on the 1st floor, right on the corner where all the kids would pass to take a shortcut to school. When this monster got out of jail, they let him move back in again. Who thought it would be a good idea to let a convicted pedophile move into a secluded place that had tons of kids walking by all day? He did not last very long, Every time he managed to leave his home, he was yelled at, hissed at, chased, and threatened. Still, that level of decision-making is maybe the most disturbing in the whole story. I am a pizza delivery driver, and this particular incident still perplexes me to this day. It was a late summer evening at 10:30 p.m., August 2 years ago, as I made my way through a wealthy neighborhood to deliver pizzas. The area was generally well lit, but there were patches of darkness throughout. I navigated through the apartment clusters and encountered one of those dimly lit spots where I had to rely on the headlights of my vehicle to locate the correct building number. My attention was completely absorbed in trying to find the right address, making me somewhat oblivious to my surroundings. Unbeknownst to me, merely 5 feet away from my vehicle stood 2 individuals in the middle of the street. To my surprise, they were completely naked. It wasn't an alarming sight, but rather one that left me utterly bewildered, and they seemed engrossed in each other's presence, exchanging glances without moving an inch. Although the sight didn't make me uncomfortable, it did raise numerous questions in my mind. Nonetheless, I had a job to complete, so I cautiously maneuvered my car around the motionless couple and proceeded towards the customer's location. Upon reaching the destination, I awaited the customer's arrival, keeping a watchful eye in my rearview mirror to ensure the naked couple didn't approach me or cause any disturbance. But as the minutes went by, and the anxiety grew, I was starting to get impatient, until finally the customer opened the door. I promptly handed over the pizza while maintaining a subtle vigilance towards this couple. As I left the customer's home and glanced back to the naked duo, they had vanished without a trace. It was as if they had evaporated into thin air, leaving me with no answers or explanations. They couldn't have gone anywhere that quickly, I'm sure of it. It will remain a mystery to me, and I wonder what the hell I saw that day. Our attic is above the attached garage, instead of the main part of the house. It has a pull-down ladder thing. We've never gone up there. Earlier today, I was in the garage taking pictures of some pool stuff the previous owners left to show the guy at the pool store so he could tell us what we were supposed to use it for. The attic door was closed then. We left the house, ran errands, and came back after 4 hours. We opened the garage and the attic door was pulled down. Like far down, not just semi-open. I was like, whoa, but thought maybe it just fell open or something. I closed it and pulled the string to reopen it, and it took a lot of force. Plus, if you don't open it far enough past a certain point, it springs back up closed. So it would have to have been pulled hard enough and far enough to stay open like that. I went up the ladder with my iPhone flashlight like a horror movie, but there's nothing up there at all. My parents suggested maybe a person broke in, but it was broad daylight. My car was in the driveway, and it's a cul-de-sac, so that was pretty unlikely. I just have no idea how it could have physically opened and stayed open like that without being pulled down hard enough. I was adopted into my current family about 5 years ago, that being February 2017. My family had a nice house where my siblings and I all had our own rooms. There was also a basement, which, at the time, was a game room for all of us, and was the biggest room in the house. Eventually, my 2 older brothers moved out during the 2nd year of me living there. When they did, my sister and I decided to switch rooms. I got her room, and she got the basement room. During those 2-ish years, my sister complained about numerous nightmares and claimed to have seen dark shadows at night, as well as hearing the boiler room and storage room door open. Me and my parents would just laugh at the claims and would say that it was because of how late she would stay up and all the energy drinks she consumed. I wish I hadn't have laughed. In December of 2021, my sister moved out due to her graduating early, and my parents renovated the basement room, where I then moved into. I was excited to have my own space downstairs. It was about the size of a smaller studio apartment, with enough closet space and a bathroom with a walk-in shower. On my first night in the basement, it was so messy due to everyone moving everything downstairs. So I stayed up past midnight, organizing everything, just wanting to get it done.
when I heard the basement door open. I thought it was my mum, so I naturally joked around and said, "Isn't it past your bedtime?" I opened the bedroom door and looked up the stairs to see the door just wide open. I was kind of confused, but shook it off and closed it. I went back downstairs and closed the bedroom door. I eventually finished and just went to bed. In the morning I asked my mum if she went down there during the night and she denied it. She claimed it was just me being tired, so I shook it off. I didn't experience anything for a few days. I came home from school one evening. I was home alone and came home to all the basement doors open as well as the door to the basement. We have cats that weren't allowed downstairs, so I worried they may have gotten into my things. My mum never forgets to close the door because of that, so I immediately thought that someone may have broken in. But our front and back doors were all locked still, and I had come in through the garage. I ran down to check and saw our cat in the boiler room. She was in the far corner, and I heard something hiss at her. I swear on my biological parents that the boiler room swung closed. It's hard to shut due to the wood door frame being somewhat uneven. That's what confused me. Me trying to be brave, I went into the corner, grabbed my cat. I opened the door and shut the remaining doors and went back upstairs, and I found my mum just coming home. "What are you doing with the cat?" she asked. "Did you leave a bunch of doors open?" "No, haven't been here since 8 a.m. and haven't needed to go down, why?" I told her about what happened, and she mentioned how maybe my brothers stopped by and pulled a prank on me, but neither of us could explain the door swinging closed. That night I couldn't fall asleep. I began to get all paranoid and started to overthink the situation from earlier. Then it hit me. I remember the things my sister complained about when she lived in the basement. The next morning, I brought it up with my mum, and she looked somewhat concerned. She never believed in the paranormal stuff, but I did. I'm pretty sure this convinced her. After this, it kept happening. The boiler room door would be mostly open, but from time to time, my bedroom door and storage room door would be open. Lights going crazy on and off happened a few times as well. I had my one and only incident of sleep paralysis, where I thought I saw a tall shadow in the bathroom doorway, and I decided to ask for help. My friend's mum was a medium, and I asked her if she could come and have a look and step into the basement to see. One night, she agreed to come over. It was back in April. She said she was drawn to the boiler room immediately. She claimed the energy was dark in the boiler room, specifically, and that there was some kind of spirit and perhaps an entity that was trying to find peace and was just angry. She suggested we get the house blessed by a professional. My mum and I appreciated the help and she left. My parents knew the house's history and were all confused. To this day, the events still occur, despite being blessed twice, but the activity has slowed down. I honestly believe that my sister's collectible antiques may have got something attached to the house, but I'm not sure. She had a few creepy clown dolls and old frames for aesthetic purposes back in high school, but then again, they're not in our home anymore. If anyone has any tips, I'd be keen to hear them.
Not too long ago, I went for a drive with some of my friends. We were driving around until late. It was pretty foggy that night. It was pretty foggy out too. It tends to be foggier in the mountains, and that's where we were. We wanted to go to the observatory area near the top of the mountain. I can't remember why we wanted to go. I realized that a jeep had started following us. It was coming up behind us really fast. One of my friends in the back pointed this out and requested in some colorful language for me to speed up. I, of course, was only happy to oblige. It was a Mercedes-Benz G-Class, which is one that basically looks like a Jeep. This thing was way more suited to the mountain roads than our little car. It was really stressful with that behind me and closing the gap with every second, plus the fog, plus my friends freaking out in the back. Luckily, I spotted the turn for the observatory. I would soon be out the road for that thing to pass if that was indeed why it was tailing me. I turned in hoping the Benz would keep going straight, but it didn't. I pulled in and blocked the exit. I knew that whatever was going to come next wasn't going to be good. I sat in the driver's seat with sweat running down my forehead, telling my friends to keep calm and lock the doors. Agonizing seconds turned into minutes, then a couple of figures emerged from the bends. We sat there, muttering to one another, pretending to be less frightened than we were. Finally, the two men approached us. They were wearing crisp and clean suits and looked really professional. A slender man who wore glasses rapped on the driver's side window, and I lowered it about 10 centimeters. "What are you doing out here this time of night?" "We're just thinking of checking out the night view here." His friend, who looked in really great shape, snorted at this. "Bunch of guys coming out here at this hour to look at the view on a foggy night, huh?" These guys looked like they were part of the Yakuza. "You know why we followed you, right?" I shook my head. "Come on, you guys driving around here ain't up to no good, no doubt. We thought you might be one of us. Don't worry, you boys are right. This is just a misunderstanding." There was a collective sigh of relief resonating in the car. We were at ease. We actually had a few cans of coffee from the vending machine together and had a chat and a smoke. We knew these guys 100% were Yakuza at this point. After a while, the guy with glasses said, "We better get going. We got something we gotta do." They were perfectly nice guys. They got back into their car, and I expected them to pull away, but they didn't. Their car just stayed, blocking the exit. We were starting to get nervous again, but then after about 3 or 4 minutes, their engines started up and they disappeared from sight, going up the road into the mountains rather than back the way we came. I don't know if they were doing anything in the mountains, but that's not my business. There wasn't anything going on, and I was just glad to be leaving. Now that we were pretty sure we weren't about to have any conflict with the Yakuza, we began to laugh about the situation and tell one another how scared we were. Well, nearly all of us were laughing. One of my friends remained quiet, and his face was pale. It was as if he'd seen a ghost. I noticed this and asked him directly if he was okay. His reply shocked me. I saw something." I pressed him to go on. The car was silent. When the big guy opened the back seat door, I got a glimpse of inside the Jeep. There was a guy with tape over his mouth and his arms behind his back. They were up to something. I know for a fact it's nothing but empty forest land up in those mountains. None of us wanted to say what we thought was going to happen to that man, but I guess we were all thinking the same thing. I called the police, but without a license plate I couldn't give them much to go on. I really don't know why my friend didn't memorize it if he saw the man in distress in the back seat. Be careful on mountain roads late at night, guys. I lived alone in a studio apartment on the 6th floor when I was in my early 20s. I had just gotten out of the shower when I heard a knock at the door. I answered it, chain on, and the guy said he was my neighbor. He looked harmless, so I removed the chain and asked what was up. Dumb, I know. It's not the dumbest thing I did in my 20s, unfortunately. He told me he was a neighbor from across the street and that I should cover my window because he could see me shower and change. And I was like, okay, buddy. And before I closed the door, I crap you not, he asked me out. After he left, I locked the door and called my boyfriend, who bought me a bat that I still have kept in my apartment ever since. I almost got shot or stabbed or something while delivering pizzas. The area of town which the order came from was sketchy as hell. Let me give you a breakdown. It was a pretty meth-heavy area, plus the city where I attend college, pizza deliveries pay for rent, you see, had been absolutely screwed over by Reaganomics and never recovered. Several mental institutions in the area were closed in the 80s, due in part to lack of federal funding, and the non-violent residents just sort of stayed around. Plus, manufacturing died, plus a chemical spill of some nature, plus poor infrastructure, blight, in other words. It was quite jarring. I would deliver pizzas to one address where a toddler in a diaper gave me money because the only adult was nodding off in the corner from who knows what, and then go to a frat house where a bunch of kids from rich families on Long Island would drunkenly make fun of my uniform before tipping me an absurdly low amount, if anything. But that is just for context. I'm one of those people who was built rather large and looked as imposing as possible while wearing a Domino's uniform and have a resting "I want to die and take someone with me" face. So anyway, I get to where I'm going. I ring the buzzer and there's no answer, but the door is unlocked and it's an apartment building. And this isn't uncommon. So I walk in and am immediately greeted by a cacophony of yelling and screaming from somewhere in the building that gets louder the closer I get to the apartment. I knock on the door of the apartment and all of a sudden everything goes quiet. Really quiet. Eerily quiet. But no one answers. I am about to knock again and a guy comes from around a blind corner in the hallway. This guy's huge, at least 6'6", and 300 pounds, inked to the gills. Some of it identifiable as prison ink and gang tattoos. He has his hand inside his pocket. He looks at me and I look at him, and eventually after a few seconds he says, "Boy, you don't want to be here right now." I said, "Okay, thank you," left the pizza, walked as quickly as I could back down the stairs and back to my car. I genuinely did not believe he was messing with me, and I remain deeply grateful that he warned me that day to leave.
This story happened when I was growing up in Bulgaria as a teenager. It was one of those days during summer break where I'd occasionally visit my grandparents to let off some steam after another school year. One of my cousins was quite insistent to explore an old abandoned house right next to ours, which he believed to be haunted. As we entered the front yard, I had an uneasy feeling stir over me that we were being watched. But my younger cousin thought I was joking and just brushed it off. Once we were out the house's yard, I saw the cellar door of the house move slightly inwards, but there wasn't any wind causing it to do that. On the next day, him and I went to a smaller area right next to that same old house to play with a soccer ball. As time passed, I felt something again while passing the ball to my cousin, and it caused me to turn my attention to the attic window of the house, where I saw a shadowy figure grinning at me. I neither flinched nor screamed nor moved, just stood there for what felt like a full minute. I shook myself out of it, and I just happened to turn to my cousin to ask if he saw it as well, but he didn't believe me. The creepy grin had something in its face that remained in my mind, and I remember the encounter to this day, many years later. Could it have been my imagination? Or do you think there was really a phantom in the attic? As a kid, my parents converted half of our garage into a room for me, so that I didn't have to share a bedroom. But right as I moved in there would be these fast-crawling noises that would run along my walls. It would keep me up for hours through the night. It would be loud scratching noises and fast running through every wall in the room. I told my parents and they had an exterminator come and see if any animals got in there somehow. The guy said there was absolutely nothing, no signs of anything that could be making the noise. My parents called me crazy and said I wasted their time. The night the exterminator came, I woke up to a loud bang on my wall. When I woke up, there was something in the corner of my room watching me. I went under the covers and tried not to acknowledge it until I passed out, and didn't even bother telling my parents about it. I didn't actually sleep in the garage after that, and I switched rooms permanently about a month after. I'll start off by saying that high school was the beginning of the years of horrible bullying and mental and emotional abuse from people who were supposedly my friends. I was short, chubby, homely, and apparently very socially awkward. I had high hopes that going off to university and leaving those people behind would be the end of it. But I could not have been more wrong. My tormentors from high school were mean, but the people I lived with on my residence floor were downright hostile and cruel. Everything I was bullied about in high school were things they hated me even worse for. Needless to say, I was beaten down to a pulp, spineless, self-hating, and traumatized. The summer between first and second year ended up being life-changing. I dropped a bunch of weight, grew into my looks a bit more, and learned how to do makeup and dress nicely.
and greatly improved my social skills. I went back the next year, an entirely different person. Suddenly, I wasn't picked on anymore, and for the first time in my life, boys were noticing me, and I was actually getting a little popular. Over the next 2 years, I continued on this upward trend, and by the time summer hit before my final year, I was the happiest and most confident I had ever been. However, that did not erase the years of trauma and abuse that had so badly damaged my psyche. Despite finally being in a good place, inside I was still a beaten down, spineless little girl who never stood up for herself and let people push her into doing things she didn't want to because she felt like she had to. And this is where our story begins. One night my friend Jaina invited me out to a bar with her friend Glenn a Saturday night. Why not? I hopped on a bus and told her I was on my way. When I got to the bar, Jaina waved me over to her table where she was sitting with this massive, hulking guy. Not like a bodybuilder, but kind of reminiscent of Hodor from Game of Thrones. "Alice, this is Glenn." We exchanged our pleasantries and proceeded with no longer being sober. As the night wore on, it was pretty obvious that Glenn was interested in me. He kept smiling at me flirtatiously, giving me the look up and down, and he really liked that I was into things like video games, movies, and comic books. I guess he wasn't doing anything overtly aggressive or creepy, but something about him gave me a bad vibe that said, I don't know about this guy, but I kept telling myself it was all in my imagination. A few days later, the three of us made plans to see the new Spider-Man movie that had just come out. As I was getting ready, I got a call from Glenn informing me that Jaina had given him my address and that he would be going to come over to walk to our university campus where Jaina still lived. I got the bad vibe again, thinking I don't want him hanging out with me or walking with me. So I said, "Oh no, don't do that. It will be much easier to go separately and just meet at Jaina's." "No, I'm walking you." Okay, that was a tad alarming, but I knew he wouldn't relent, and that we would be walking the 30 minutes to campus together whether I liked it or not. When the movie ended, Glenn invited us to hang out and drink at his place where we could stay the night. He lived a good way away from where Jaina and I did, so staying the night did make sense. I felt uneasy but thought to myself, no, it'll be fine. Jaina will be with me. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. For some insane reason, he felt a good way to impress me was by showing me how much he could drink, because that's what everyone can look for in a partner, which was much less than he thought, and soon he was horrendously drunk. And that, my friends, is where it all hit the fan. He turned into a complete ogre, started punching out lights, and tearing his clothes to shreds in a drunken rage before returning to the bathroom to vomit loudly. When he came out, Jaina got up to use the bathroom next. I begged her not to go, or at least let me go in with her so I wouldn't be alone with him, but she said no and left me to fend for myself. That's when Glenn grabbed me and started making out with me, shoving his tongue down my throat. Did I mention he'd just puked his guts out? And even had a little bit of vomit on his shirt still. I began pushing him away, which was difficult as he was much taller, stronger, and heavier than I. This of course angered him, and he started breaking things again. That's when I got a text from Jaina saying, "We should go, he's absolutely pathetic like this," and I immediately called for a cab. We informed Glenn that we were leaving, and that incensed him even more. "Yeah, well, I'm not going to let you leave." That's when we ran out the door to the street. Luckily, he didn't chase after us, and our cab got there soon. We were dropped off at Jaina's residence building where we lamented the night as I pulled a sliver of broken light bulb from my foot. Now a word about Jaina. She, like me, has too suffered years of abuse and trauma that manifested itself in horrific taste in men whom she'd be completely subservient to. That I knew. But what she told me next shocked me even more. Her and Glenn were actually casually hooking up and had been for a while. He took her home that night after the bar, and as he was literally climbing into bed with her, he told her how much he wanted to have me and wanted her to help him. But remember what I said about the fact that he liked that I was into video games, movies, and comics? That also meant that I pinged on his gaydar, and said to her that if she, as in me, doesn't sleep with him, then I was a lesbian. Now that's some next level stuff right there. The next day I got a text from Glenn. A little birdie told me you're not very happy with me. That bird is right, I replied. Yeah, I'm sorry I acted that way. Would you be interested in playing mini-golf sometime? I couldn't believe the nerve of him. A half-assed apology over such horrific behavior that he was barely acknowledging, and then asking to hang out again? I knew that it was insanity, but beaten down, spineless little me still thought maybe I should give him a partial second chance. Maybe, but if you think I will ever do anything remotely sexual with you, you're out your mind. What? Of course not. In fact, I'm offended you even thought those were my intentions. Yeah, no, I'm out. Unfortunately, he also knew the store that I worked at and came to my checkout aisle a few times, once to buy a replacement for the shirt he ripped apart, and would try to strike up a casual conversation with me before suggesting we go somewhere together. I'd treat him as coldly as possible and give him a very definite decline. He seemed to have finally given up, as he stopped coming by, much to my relief. But that wasn't quite the end. A few weeks went by when I received a furious text from Glenn. Oh, so what, you're not even talking to me anymore? I couldn't believe it. After everything he'd done and said, he thinks I'm a horrible person for doing all of this? How could someone be so self-centered and deluded? I told him of course I'm not talking to him anymore, and that he's beyond abusive, unhinged, and thinks he can have whatever he wants, and I made it very clear I never wanted to see him again and to just leave me alone. He never replied, but rather than make me feel better, I was growing increasingly paranoid, if it meant he had truly given up, or because he was planning an attack. Luckily, my roommate and our best friend were big burly guys, and made sure to escort me around because he knew where I lived and where I worked, and I'm happy to say that text message really was the last I ever heard from him. I don't wish him ill. I hope he gets the help he needs, but in any case, I'd rather never meet again. I used to work closing shift at Pizza Hut. It was the site of the only unsolved murder case of my town. This kid, Randall, had been murdered closing a Pizza Hut and robbed. They didn't find him till morning. Anyway, all of us that worked closing knew it was haunted and Randall was still around. Well, one night it was just me and another closer when we heard footsteps above us, and you could see the dust fall from the ceiling with each step. But no one was there other than us. We're closing shop, and I see someone standing at the counter wearing an old Pizza Hut shirt watching us, so I can tell him I'll be with him in a moment and grab my other closer who was watching the cameras. He never saw anyone come in or out, and the doors never dinged to alert us. We walked back out and he's still there. Turn around to check orders and he's gone. I was pretty freaked out, and my coworker was just like, well, now you've officially met Randall. He's a good ghost. Always say goodnight to him after that. I had always been a skeptic when it came to the paranormal, but that all changed the night I encountered a spirit in the attic of my childhood home. It was a hot summer night, and I couldn't sleep due to the oppressive heat. As I tossed and turned in my bed, I suddenly heard a faint knock coming from the ceiling above me. Thinking it was just the old pipes in the house making the noise, I tried to ignore it to go back to sleep. But the knocking persisted, growing louder and more insistent with each passing minute. Eventually I couldn't take it any longer and decided to investigate. I slowly made my way to the attic, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the top of the stairs, I saw a ghostly figure hovering in the corner of the room. I was frozen with fear, unable to speak or move, when suddenly it disappeared before my eyes, leaving me alone in the darkness. That night was the night I learnt that the paranormal was real, and that there are forces beyond our understanding at work in the world. The spirit in the attic will stay with me forever, as a reminder that there is much in the universe we do not understand. Years ago, I used to work for one of the major chain pizza places around. Near the end of the night, we would drop down to just the shift leader and 2 delivery drivers. One driver would do the first round of dishes, we called this the late driver, and then go home about an hour or two before closing depending on how busy the night was. Then, we would just be the shift leader and the closing driver, and we would do all the final cleaning and whatnot. Now, no one ever wanted to do the closing shifts really, because they wanted to come in during volume periods, make their money, then leave without doing the actual cleaning work that came with working till close. Except we had this one guy that was middle-aged, single, retired, military. The minimum amount of time required, and he was a very weird individual. As I learnt after working with him for a while, he also had extreme anger and aggression issues, quirks, pet peeves, and social behaviors. He was like the kid in high school that everyone picked on, but when one person tried to be nice to him, he either lashed out to make that person give up being nice, or got so weird that you regretted being nice to him. He also had a lot of very strong beliefs about how he should be treated when it came to customer interactions, and would be vindictive or passive-aggressive to people he believed had wronged him. The other people used to go extreme lengths to mess with this guy, because he had such dramatic reactions, and I felt terrible about them doing it to him, but also realized that he kind of deserved it sometimes, because he was the first one to try and screw with other people, because he felt like he deserved a better tipping address than someone else, because he would work harder or whatever as the closer, even though we check our runs by whoever was next on the screen. They would say, top driver, top delivery, meaning the driver that had to be back in the store the longest got the delivery that was the oldest, so that it would stay that way and be fair. Some of his issues. Number 1. If an order was $19.25, he would put the 75 cents in his hand before going to the door. If they tried to tip him less than $1, say they just gave him a 20 and told him to keep the change, he would try and make them take the coin, saying, "No, thank you." Sometimes, if he was feeling extra saucy, he would say something like, "You might need it for another order." I cannot stress how much that change adds up to at the end of the night, especially if you're giving back 99 cents because of your pride and you can't accept it without that extra penny. One customer refused to take it from him one night, and he got so angry he threw the handful of change at the guy's door. The guy called to complain because he heard him do it, and he had change all over his porch, and the guy was written up. He got so obsessed with doing this, he actually brought one of those metal belt coin dispensers that you would push the lever in and it would pop out a coin. He would buy rolls of change off us just to keep it full. And when doing the schedules, we were just scheduled 1 hour past closing time because we were expected to take deliveries up until close. That keeps us accounted for labor for the delivery driver to make a delivery at close and have time to clean up. So the guy wanted a full 40 hours a week. Since he was scheduled, it was determined to work. If he saw that we were going to be out early, he would do something to cause a problem to make us stay later. He would bring a scrub brush from home and sit there and brush on every dish for a dramatically long time to waste extra time, to make it stretch so that he could be done closer to the scheduled time. If we were ready to mop up and leave 10 minutes to closing time, he would spill the mop bucket on purpose and then either try to take a whole hour to clean it up, or take extra long, giving me his money to make up for the extra time by finding a discrepancy with his total, then conveniently figuring it out while it happened to hit the hour. When you cut a pizza, sometimes the pepperoni pulls into the cuts. By our guidelines, we're supposed to pull the pep out of the cuts so the pizza looks like it has the right amount of topping instead of the toppings being bunched up and crammed on the cuts. We just use the cutter to push them back. He was obsessed with using the tongs to do it instead, and would have a damn near mental breakdown and turn completely red-faced and start growling the longer it took if the tongs weren't out. The other guys actually hung them from the ceiling one day, about 12 foot off the ground, just to watch him freak out, and he had to go get the ladder to get them. I know this just sounds like a weird guy, but no one else wanted to work with him, and he wanted the shifts no one else got. So I got to work alone with him every night, 5 to 6 times a week for months, despite me saying I felt unsafe with him. I was the one that was nice to him, so he kind of knew me as a friend, and I so regret being that person. If I mentioned liking something, he would go out of his way to bring it to me. Like one day, I had nice coffee from Starbucks and I mentioned how much I loved the cups with the flat lids. So this guy actually went online and ordered a clear plastic cup with flat lids and straws, and brought them in so he could offer them to me. He tried to play it off as he just happened to have some and thought I might want one. I told him no, it's okay, I brought a cup, or I was just drinking out of a bottle. And he turned red and angry because I had turned it down after he had wasted his time and money ordering them. This was years ago when they weren't very common like they are now, which is why I was washing out the Starbucks one and reusing it that day. He had done it with a few other things. One day I mentioned liking Domino's pastas and said I wish we had pasta too. After his next delivery he had taken way too long and I was confused where he was. He came back, had gone to Walmart, bought all this stuff to make pasta, including an electric kettle to boil pasta in, foil pans, pasta, all kinds of crap. He actually got set up on the delivery table and made enough pasta for two. But I had eaten while he was on the delivery, and he again got upset when I told him I was too full for anything. He wouldn't speak to me for the rest of the night, and was slamming stuff red-faced the whole time. When a customer wanted to pay their order with a credit card, but didn't say that when the driver got there or changed their mind and wanted to pay with credit card at the door, he would have to call us and process it over the phone. He called me to do this one night, and I ran the card. He then asked me if I wanted to speak to the customer, and I told him no, why would I need to do that? He got very angry and said, "Gee, thanks," and hung up on me. When the pay over the phone, a credit slip isn't available. Delivery drivers are not allowed to suggest tipping in any way, and I hadn't thought about it. I was supposed to tell the customer, if you could sign the driver's delivery slip as a credit card receipt, you can add the tip and total there if you choose. But because I didn't do this, he wasn't allowed to say that, and came back red, snarling at me how I had cost him a tip. I told him, okay, sorry, I just gave you $5 extra mileage to compensate. But he was still very angry that he could have had the possibility of making more than if I'd have just left it up to the customer. He stomped around red-faced for the rest of the night. Then while I was sitting in the office counting down the cash drawer from the register, he just let out this insanely loud roar and threw a half-empty water bottle at the office window as hard as he could, promptly scaring the ever-loving crap out of me and making me hide with the door shut for the rest of the night. I also had a night where my boyfriend had come. We were having problems at the time and had discussed going to a 24-hour place to eat after work, as we closed at about 1 AM on weekends. We picked IHOP. We were going to sit down and discuss important relationship crap because we were very close to separating. We just discussed going to eat. It was already understood between me and him why we never talked about that, but the driver overheard us and actually followed us to the IHOP after work and tried to sit with us, like he was surprised to see us there. I got super uncomfortable, and my boyfriend gave him a very serious look and said, "I'm sorry, we're discussing some pretty important personal things, so tonight isn't the best night." He turned red and said, "Okay," and sat at the booth directly behind us and turned his music up as loud as he could. He used to wear these huge wireless headphones all the time, and we could hear his headphones blaring his music even though he was wearing them. When we went to leave, I tried to apologize to him that we weren't up for guests with us that night, but he closed his eyes, bobbed his head, and ignored me till I left, and he didn't speak to me at work for about a week. I had tons of nights where he would get no tip on some order and have these supercharged rages, and stuff would just snowball until I was hiding from him wherever I could. I was afraid to clean the store too early because he would come back to the store about 15 minutes to close and see I had gotten everything cleaned up while he was gone, and would turn beet red and just lean against the wall fuming like a bomb. And I had to be alone with this guy every day for months. It got to the point on weekends that I was so scared of being alone with him. If it was slightly busy, I would either keep the other driver a little later and pay him extra money out of my pocket just to feel safe. He was my hero that got me through some of the nights working with this guy. Another night, I was there with another manager, and we were in the office looking at the numbers in the system. The other manager was also a guy. The driver had his phone hooked up to a speaker playing music through the store. The guy with me just freezes. His eyes slide out of focus and his mouth just drops. And he's staring at the empty space in front, almost drooling on himself, because whatever happened had him shocked and amused. He slowly turns to look at me and starts to laugh out this low, dirty old man laugh. I'm completely lost as to what's going on and ask him, "What?" Then he says, "You don't hear that?" I was so focused on his reaction that I wasn't paying attention to what was playing. Then I recognize it. I look up out the office door in time to see the driver making a beeline all red-faced to his phone, catches me looking at him, and just gives me this smirk. His phone was playing over porn, over the entire store very loudly, and somehow I didn't notice it. The guy also used to sit in the office when we were slow and would tell me about his sexual prowess because he practices Kegels, and how when he was overseas in the military, he had a girlfriend that didn't speak English, and he later learned she was a hooker. He overshared way too much information, it was terrible. He bragged about the Kegel thing like he was trying to interest me, and I never wanted to escape as badly then as I did even after all the insane rages. Once I quit that store, he got paired with a male manager. The complaints were taken seriously, and they finally fired him because he backed into a post in the parking lot of a strip club. The club didn't complain, but the stripper Cinnamon was notorious for not tipping. Irony. The girl would have her customers order her a pizza as a tip, and have them pay for it when it arrived. Since the pizza itself was a tip to her, they wouldn't tip the driver usually. This was the lowest class place you can imagine. Well, one of the customers had to call the store to pay with their credit card one day. When he didn't tip the driver, the customer was still on the phone with the manager in the parking lot, and the driver was raging so hard he slammed it into reverse and backed into a post and took off. The customer told the manager that they needed to do something about this guy and that he was going to severely hurt someone and that he technically had just fled the scene of an accident, even if he had only damaged his own car and the post was fine. They fired him when he got back. All the time I was alone with this guy and all the weird stuff he'd done in the time I worked there, I hope no one ever has to suffer that again. I know I could have just quit, but I enjoyed the job, the pay was decent for my position, and I wasn't the one in the wrong, so I was being stubborn and wanted to see him removed before I could just give up, and was happy doing so. But in the end, I gave up and quit. No job is worth crying in the office for, and calling everyone you know to see if they can come hang out with you, just so that you can feel safe.
I've worked in a fair share of creepy places, but this one takes the top spot. The best way to describe it is an 1800s mansion. The place is huge and very creepy, the sort of place where you wouldn't want to be alone in. We were doing some renovations in the building, as it was going to be made into a place for the public to be taken around and on tours and such. Well, one thing we had to do was block off a doorway that went into an attic space that was very unsafe. Inside the attic space was a huge circular glass window that you could see the main parking area. All the while, we felt like we were being watched, and occasionally there would be banging coming from the attic. We assumed it came from another part of the building, as there wasn't anything in there that could fall over, and we were only blocking up the way in. So, we completed the job, loaded the tools into the truck, and as we were leaving I looked up into the building, and there, I see a woman dressed in all white waving at us. The three of us waved back, before realizing she was standing dead in the center of the circular window in the attic that we had just closed off. We freaked out, and when we looked up again, she was gone. My basement has always had a negative feeling. It's cold and dark down there, so I've always just assumed it's in my head. Today at noon, I went down and was beginning to disassemble a bassinet so that I could clean it before giving it to a co-worker. My 2.5-year-old began screaming hysterically and running across the room. He was staring at the ceiling the entire time.
His face went white, and I had to take him back upstairs so we could calm down. Our laundry room is down there, and we would go there often. He even has his toys down there when we play. My kiddo is barely verbal and possibly on the spectrum, so I can't really ask him what he saw. He doesn't normally freak out like that though. I've never felt, seen or heard anything in the rest of the house. No one has died there, the house is new, and there are no records of previous structures. The bassinet I was messing with is used and has been passed down a few times now. My son hated it, and so did my niece. Is it possible that something's attached to the bassinet? I just need to know what's going on here. When I was growing up in the UK, we lived in a normal terraced house. This comes on later in the story. We had a 2-bedroom house, and I hated my bedroom. I always felt uneasy and scared, especially scared of a built-in wardrobe. The door would always open, even when I made sure it was closed. This wardrobe had my mum's things in it, plus I would hear footsteps on the landing and up the stairs, and it was a very distinctive noise. It wasn't a normal creaking, and my mum would say, "Don't worry, it's just the next door neighbours. The floorboards are all connected." Me, being young and dumb, believed that. It never got any worse than that for years, just footsteps moving around the door, and the constant fear couldn't shake it. Then my sister was born, and we needed a 3rd bedroom. So my parents turned the attic into a bedroom, which became mine. But while they were renovating it, the stairs going up to the attic needed to be built, and it was on the other side of the creepy wardrobe, and the partition wall was left open and covered with a plastic sheet, and I was playing in the hallway with my 2 friends next to it. And I then got a sudden fear descend worse than ever, and at that very moment, the plastic sheet shot out like a figure had run into it. We all ran screaming, and my mum came to me, checked, and I said what happened. I'll never forget how her face dropped, and she went white and just said, "Don't worry, the workmen must be putting in the new window for your bedroom. It must make a draft." Fast forward to the attic becoming my bedroom. I was even more terrified than the old room. The noises of footsteps coming up the stairs, the constant fear. I thought I saw a figure a few times from the corner of my eyes, but never head on, and I could never sleep. It got so bad that I had to sleep on the floor in my sister's room for 2 years. Now the kicker. My mum is very spiritual, and what was in the wardrobe? A Ouija board. She had horrible experiences with one, and said she couldn't get rid of it. I'm a believer. More creepy goings-on have happened to me through the years, and that was the worst and most consistent. We lived in the house from when I was 4 to 12, and once we moved, nothing creepy happened in the house again. I still feel that weird feeling in places, but never more than that. When I was 16, I questioned my mum on all of it, and she too said she heard and saw things, more than me, but didn't want my sister or I to be scared. She still wouldn't say what the board said or did, but it was when she was younger that it happened. I wonder if any of you know what's happening and what my mum is hesitant to talk about.
I was out of town on business, so I treated myself and ordered in from my favourite restaurant. Delivery guy arrived and insisted he had to come into my place to deliver the food to take payment. I had to loudly refuse this multiple times in the hope the neighbour would hear me, and kept insisting. Finally, I got him to process my payment in the hallway, but he was muttering under his breath the whole time. It scared the hell out of me. I double-locked the door when he left and sat up all night feeling uneasy. I wish I'd reported him to the restaurant, but I was too shaken to think about it.